MDTA board and will be conducting this morning's meeting until Chairman Slater is able to join us. Before I call the meeting to order, Natalie, do we have a quorum?
Yes, sir. All members are present.
Thank you, ma'am. Madam Secretary, I appreciate that. So I now hereby call the meeting of the MDTA board to order at 9:33 is what I have on my computer. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the live streaming law, this meeting is being conducted by video conference and being live streamed on the MDTA board page. All members will have their video active during the entirety of the meeting. I ask that anyone who is presenting or answering questions to please turn your video and audio on when speaking and also identify yourself. When you are finished, please turn your video off and put your audio on mute. To minimize background noise during the call, I would ask that everyone on the line please mute your phones except when speaking. There are no members of the public, elected officials, or members of the media pre-registered to comment during the meeting at today's meeting. For those watching the meeting via live stream, we have posted the materials for today's meeting on the MDTA board webpage if you wish to follow along. There will be a walk-on approval item regarding MDTA Board Resolution 21-03, municipal financing and refinancing that is added to the meeting today. The item will be presented by Mr. Alan Harmon, and we will do that after agenda item number 3. Due to the anticipated length of today's meeting, we may take a couple of breaks at appropriate times, and we'll announce those breaks when we get to that point. I'd like to, first of all, thank Natalie and the entire MDTA team for, again, prepping for this meeting, as they always do. They do a fantastic job. It's not just a game day performance. There's a lot of work that goes on between meetings, between last month and this month. So thanks again for everything you all are doing. Shout out to the winter operations team for keeping the roadways and facilities safe for travelers and our teammates during the recent bouts of winter weather. And hopefully the Orioles' first full team workout earlier this week will be the catalyst for our spring, and we'll be out of this winter stretch that we were in just recently. And so at this time, I'm going to move to the agenda, and item number 1 is approval of the open and closed session minutes of January 28th, 2021.
Move for approval, Member Cox.
Member Cox, move for approval. Do we have a second?
Second. Second.
Okay, I heard a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Madam Secretary, the motion is unanimous. Okay, next item is an approval item. Actually, there are 2 contracts for award. Ms. Donna DeSerbo will be presenting. The first is FT 3009. It's superstructure repairs of various bridges north and south of the Fort McHenry Tunnel. So Donna, the Fort McHenry Tunnel, you're up.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Jeff Davis. Donna DeSerbo was unavailable today.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
We were not able to update Natalie in time, so please forgive us for that discretion. But I would like to
appreciate you being able to jump in at a moment's notice. Thank you.
So good morning, members. And once again, just to clarify, my name is Jeff Davis with the Division of Procurement here at the MDTA. And the first item I'd like to present, as Mr. Powell stated, is contract FT 3009. This is the superstructure repairs of various bridges on the Fort McHenry Tunnel. The work to be performed under this contract includes superstructure repairs, such as fatigue retrofits and drainage system repairs on 19 bridges on I-95, both north and south of Fort McHenry Tunnel. We received 5 bids. The low bidder was Concrete General, whose bid was 52% below our engineer's estimate. They have provided a NBE participation goal to meet our goals. They provided a plan to meet our goals of 20% and 1% VSBE. There was a protest, but that protest has been resolved. Have any questions?
Yeah.
We're seeking full approval, not contingent approval for this contract.
Okay, very good. Any questions from the board?
I had a question. I have a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Member Gaines. Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to get used to this.
Yeah. It just seemed, did they have a, Jeff, did they have a, have you already had a good look at all these bridges to see how many repairs we need, or this is just a blanket? I mean, it's not a lot of money for 19 bridges, so you can't have a whole lot lined up there, I guess.
Right, so this contract is an aggregate of many repairs that need to be done. But if Brian Wolf or Jim Harkness is on the line, they could clarify. Don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm here. Good morning, members. For the record, my name is Brian Wolf. I'm Director of Project Development for the Office of Engineering and Construction. This contract, the repairs that are being done typically or historically have been done with our on-call contracts. So they were more of an isolated situation of like 1 or 2 repairs. This contract, however, has identified the similar repairs on multiple locations. So our attempt was to package this in an advertised contract rather than to address it with an on-call, which typically has a higher expense to it. It's more of a time material type approach. And we typically see better pricing when we package these repairs into larger contracts and put them out as an advertised contract.
Okay, so you specified what had to be done on these.
Correct.
I got it. Okay, good.
Correct.
I was thinking it was on call. Yeah, understand.
Brian, with respect to that may answer my question. So there's a pretty significant disparity between the engineer's estimate and all the bids, really, particularly the winning, or what we're proposing for the winning bid. So why was that? Did we just take which would have been the cost under the on-call contract, add them up, and that was 10.2 and.
Not exactly. Yes and no, I'll say. Yes, we took what we had historically from the on-calls, and then our design team tried to factor those costs to put it more in line with a more advertised contract. It's difficult to do because there's a lot of things that go into the on-call versus the advertised contract. So we took what we had from previous contracts and tried to modify it to fit the advertised, and that was one big factor. Yes, that accounts for some of the percentage difference. The other is we are seeing a lot more competition with our advertised contracts.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Hey, Jeff, you mentioned there was a protest. I assume that's gone through made it through all the channels and it's finished.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Always good to know. Okay, hearing no further questions, I will entertain a motion to approve. Okay, gotcha. Member Gaines, do we have a second?
Second.
Member Rosen is a second. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion's unanimous, Madam Secretary. Next item up is KH 3009, the I-95 Express Toll Lanes northbound extension from Maryland 43 to south of Maryland 152. So, Jeff, you're back up.
Okay, great. So this contract, we are seeking contingent approval at this time. The work to be performed under this contract includes extension of the express toll lanes, approximately 6.3 miles north of Maryland 43 to south of the Maryland 152 interchange. We received, for some reason I can't remember the numbers. We received 8 bids. The lowest bidder being Allen Myers, which was 5% below our engineer's estimate. Our MBE participation goal for this contract was 16%, and our VSBE goal was 1%. And Allen Myers has proposed a plan to meet those goals. There was no protest on this contract.
Okay.
Any questions at this time?
This is Member Von Paris. I have just a question as it relates to, I'm sure we've done this, but I just wanted to confirm the process as it relates to it's a big project divided over 3 years. If it was equal, it's 58 million a year. How do we have I guess our cash flow projections will support this project? Just want to make sure that we're covered there.
It's a great question. I would want to defer to our chief engineer or our chief operations officer if they are available, or Brian, if Brian can speak to this.
Yeah, I can speak to this one as well. Yes, we do have cash flow projections. It's part of the overall ETL program, so we have looked at all of our contracts within the program and made sure that the money and the cash flows are doable. And after it goes to construction, the cash flows are adjusted again to reflect the contractor's price. And we've done all that up till now, so we do show that we can support this contract for the next 3 years.
Thank you.
One other very small point, but under the proposed goal for the MBA participation, so it looks like they're proposing 16%, but within the various categories, I don't know if that adds up to 68. Does that include the VSBE?
No. So the way that is broken out is when some of our contracts have a requirement to meet certain sub goals. So that's why we have those columns there. This contract did not have that sub goal requirement, but we did record which of those subcategories that they did achieve. But no, those numbers would not add up to the 16%.
Okay.
I move approval for the contract.
This is Mario, I'll second.
Sean, are you there? We lost
Sean, you may be on mute.
John, you're on mute.
Oh, that would explain why Member Gaines just said, Sean, you're on mute. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So do we, I heard we had a motion and a second. I heard that part, and no further discussion. So with that said, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, the motion is unanimous. I mean, the item passes unanimously, Madam Secretary. Okay, so next up on our agenda
Thank you so
is
much.
quarterly review of the investment strategies, and this is also an approval item from Mr. Garman. So Alan has the next two. As you remember, we have a walk-on item that will follow this one. So Alan, you'll have the quarterly review. This is up next, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning. This is our normal scheduled quarterly review of investment performance, and this is for the trailing 12 months through December 31st. During that period, investments conform to our investment policy limitations and also our structuring by account adhered to the board approved strategy. The total return performance for the general account was in line with the benchmark index. During the duration extension period that we're in currently for the M&O reserve, it's going to be difficult to benchmark that portfolio against an index, and I'll talk more about that as we progress through this item. The prior board approved strategy for the general account is unchanged, and if you recall back in February of 2020, the board had approved a lengthening of the duration of both the general account and the M&O reserve that makes up our entire unrestricted cash position of $350 million. Because of market disruptions and dislocations, and the extreme, record low interest rate level that started immediately after that due to the pandemic, we came back to the board and asked for the flexibility to delay that duration extension. And that's where we had been for several months. Then we came back to the board in November and we recommended a change for just a small portion of that unrestricted cash. That was about 14%, to begin tiptoeing out and extending the duration of just the M&O reserve. And the investment committee is going to come back at some point in coming months to make the recommendation to extend the remaining 86%. But we're particularly not anxious to do that in the face of rapidly rising interest rates. For the debt service reserves, we only have one cash-funded debt service reserve currently, and that was associated with our last financing. It's approximately a $30 million portfolio, and that was funded last June. And at the time, we had requested board approval to keep those monies relatively short in duration, and that was, again, a reluctance to invest a large portion of money at record low interest rates. And perhaps more importantly, because it's a long-term portfolio and we take generally a very long-term approach to the investment strategy, but we were looking at a short-term opportunity to potentially replace that cash with an insurance policy called a surety. And since that was a near-term potential withdrawal of that cash, in the event that we can fund that surety or the policy, we won't need to keep that 30 million in the account and we can release that money to fund the capital program. So, I mean, that's really the key reason why we're reluctant to invest that money out. We've got this bond sale coming up scheduled for March 24th, and we've been working with one of the insurers on a pricing quote, and we expect to get that in approximately 2 weeks. And we've got some tentative pricing that looks attractive, and we seem to have a tentative approval on the credit front. So it looks like there's a good chance that we'll be able to purchase a surety for the new money financing and potentially purchase a surety for last year's financing as well. In terms of investment strategy, all of our accounts employ either a matched funding or total return approach. So our debt service accounts and capital accounts are managed on a matched funding basis, where we match investment maturities to our known or potential cash flows. For our unrestricted and restricted reserves, that would be the monies in the general and M&O reserve, and the restricted reserves would be the debt service reserves. We manage those accounts for total return, and with that, we're considering the risk-return trade-off associated with those longer-term structures. Essentially, we understand that longer duration portfolios benefit from higher average annual returns over long periods of time, but they will exhibit greater volatility of returns. Our general account is benchmarked against the 1 to 5 year index, and our investment maturities in that account are staggered from 3 months out to 5 years. The effective duration is approximately 3. The M&O reserve, again, that's the account that we're trying to transition, and we're going from that 1 to 5 year benchmark out to a 1 to 13 year benchmark. And so the structure will eventually be staggered maturities from 6 months to 15 years. And so we're essentially moving from a 3-year average maturity out to an approximately 7.5 year average maturity. And we began that transition in December, but it's a very slow approach. We're very much closer to the old index than we are to the new one. And one of the questions raised at the Finance Committee was, when we envision getting to the new benchmark. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer then nor now. It's with rates rising so rapidly, we're definitely not in a hurry to extend duration. We've been making a couple of purchases of taxable municipals that offered good relative value to agencies, meaning they were higher yielding, but we're not particularly in a hurry to extend the duration. And just for perspective, the old benchmark, the 1 to 5 year, is down about 0.25% calendar year to date, and the new benchmark is down about 2.5%. So you can see in a very short period of time, the accruals don't have much opportunity to offset the negative price returns as interest rates rise. Moving on to the relative performance and benchmarking, our total return performance for the trailing 12 months through December was in line with that 1 to 5 year benchmark index. The unrestricted reserves, that's the general and the M&O account, that's the 350 million. The performance was 4.65%, which was very much in line with the index, which was at 4.79%. The slight variance there was largely associated with those portfolios being slightly short the index in the falling rate environment that was primarily at the beginning of that calendar 2020. The recommendation here is to approve the investment strategies for the current quarter, which is essentially a continuation of the strategies of last quarter. During our February 9th Finance Committee meeting, the Finance Committee concurred with the continuation of the current investment strategy. With that, we're seeking approval, and I will address any questions.
Thank you, Alan. Do we have any questions from the members? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sir, Member
Hey,
Gaines.
Alan. It just seems like our basic strategy is very similar to just like an individual would do on a laddered bond portfolio, where we're maybe a little more detailed in that we're trying to match costs, or match our revenue with as the costs come in. So it could be if you have big liabilities, you're gonna have more bonds maturing in that time frame. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we have two categories of accounts. So one is a matched funding, which I think you're alluding to. So we have a capital account, and when we issue bonds, we have a construction account. So we still have bond proceeds left, about 70 million in our construction account from the last year's issuance. I understand about 25 of that is going out today for expenses. So that remaining 50 million is supposed to last us for the next couple of months until these new bonds settle. So our bonds are scheduled for the 24th. And I'm sorry, I just misspoke. The construction account from the prior bonds is completely wiped out. What we're spending now is the capital monies, which are essentially unrestricted monies that have flowed from net operating revenues. So for those types of accounts, we match up investment maturities to projected spending. So that means we either have money market mutual funds or investments in the Maryland Local Government Investment Pool, which essentially have overnight liquidity, or we buy short agencies or short commercial paper, and we try to match those maturities with the expected spending. The CTP this year works out to be roughly 45 million a month in projected spending. So those are the accounts where we have match funding. Also for our debt service accounts, we pay debt service twice a year, January 1 and July 1. So we set aside monies in those accounts every month from net operating revenues. So the longest investments we can have in those accounts would be essentially a year. And each month, those investment maturities would have to get shorter to meet that upcoming interest or principal and interest payment. So those are our matched funding accounts. Then for the general and the M&O reserve, we typically have no need or intent to ever tap those. We maintain that cash for contingencies, and it's very important that we maintain that size of unrestricted cash position to hold the AA credit rating and access to the capital markets. if we didn't have those cash reserves, we would not be at the AA ratings level, and our costs of financing would be much higher. So we have that money there for contingencies, but because it's an extremely long-term reserve, we look at the decision on investments for those two accounts like we would about capital financing decisions. They're very long-term, and so we take a very long-term approach to strategy. So I think the answer to your question is we don't have any expected near-term cash flows for the general account or the M&O reserve. They're just static reserves there, and so that's why we take a little longer approach there.
Thanks for explaining that again.
Great.
Thank you, Alan. Any further questions for Alan? Great. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the quarterly review of investment strategy and performance.
I'll make the motion.
I'll se-
Okay.
Be approved.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a second from Member Gaines. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, Madam Secretary. I think I heard Member Carroll pop in with an aye. Okay. Oh, Alan is still up because we have walk-on item. Thank you, sir. We have
Thank
our
you.
walk-on item for approval regarding MDTA Board Resolution 21-03, municipal financing and refinancing. So Alan, you are still up, sir.
Great, thank you. And thank you for accommodating this walk-on item. We don't bring these lightly, and it's just of critical importance and something that we didn't necessarily foresee in recent weeks. We're seeking board approval of Resolution 21-03 for municipal financing. And this is essentially a delegated authority that would authorize management to issue toll revenue bonds to finance a portion of capital projects through fiscal 22 and refinance the Series 2008A TIFIA loan with municipal bonds. This may sound familiar to the board because it amends and restates a prior resolution, which was 20-07, that was adopted by the board in November of last year. What it's adding essentially is flexibility to refinance the $480 million TIFIA loan. The prior resolution was solely for the new money financing portion, and this amends that essentially and adds the flexibility to tack on a refinancing component. The combined resolution is for $900 million, and essentially that's $400 million of new money and about $480 million for the refinancing. There's no change in the new money portion. This is in line with the last board approved forecast. So that's sized at approximately $400 million of bond proceeds. If we were seeking about $380 million for the capital program, if we are able to buy the surety policy, then we will downsize that financing by approximately $20 million. The $482 million, the refinancing component, is sized to the existing TIFIA loan. So we owe about $482 million on that. And the final maturity of that TIFIA loan is in 2047. So it's about 26 and a half years to maturity. The refinancing component will be market dependent. And it's important. The reason why this is sort of an urgent issue and why we're exploring this is that there's another board resolution that gives us the ability to refinance the TIFIA loan with a new TIFIA loan. And we're working with the Build America Bureau as part of USDOT to obtain new money financings for the Nice Bridge, as well as to refinance the TIFIA loan with the USDOT. Unfortunately, that process is very long, and we're not looking to get a rate lock and that refinancing done until what we're hearing from the Bureau is, around approximately June, July time period. So what we're facing is, rapidly rising interest rates, particularly on the long end of the curve. So this hopefully ties back to the investment item as well. So, I mean, just for perspective, we've seen in the 10 and 30-year parts of the yield curve just since December 31st. So, less than 2 months, there's more than 50 basis point move in those parts of the curve. And so that's raising, our potential financing costs and diminishing our potential savings. So the consideration now is that we've looked at refinancing at prevailing treasury rates and a refinancing at municipal rates, and they're relatively close. The treasury rates are slightly advantaged. There are two key factors right now that are helping us on the municipal side. One is that in recent weeks, municipal yields relative to treasury yields had been at all-time lows. So that muni to treasury ratio, it had literally never been that low before. Just in the last week, things have moved a little bit against us. So it's not quite as attractive as it was. And that's why the refinancing decision is somewhat day to day. The other component that's helping us is that there's significant institutional demand for low coupon structures. And that type of couponing helps us to achieve cash flow savings. So what we had looked at recently was projected net present value savings of more than $40 million over the life of that debt with either a TIFIA loan refinancing with USDOT or in muni bonds. And it would generate cash flow savings of about, approximately $2 million a year. Again, that's eroded somewhat in the last week. And then when you consider additional refinancings of both those structures, the savings are closer to $65 million over the remaining 26 years. So the decision we're faced with is, we could refinance now in municipal bonds, potentially in March, and lock in some savings, or we could wait until July when treasury rates are potentially higher than municipal financing rates are today and refinance with the bureaus. So those are the decisions that we're working on, and that's the analysis that we're doing. And so that's why it's very market dependent. And we're seeking the flexibility to either, act with the municipal bond refinancing, March or early April, or obviously we have another resolution outstanding that the board's delegated authority to refinance, with a new TIFIA loan. But we know that's not likely until June, July time period. So what we're seeking is approval of this updated resolution 21-03. The resolution, like all of these other financing rate related resolutions, have limiting provisions. So it essentially limits the par amount to the $900 million. It sets an end date deadline of August 31st, and we would be required to come back, or Jim and Deb would, at the first board meeting. So we'll be back in likely in late March to give an update to the board.
So this is Deb. This resolution, when you look at the resolutions combined that you've approved, this isn't changing the amount. This refunding had always been envisioned. It just gives us the flexibility to go to the municipal market instead of having to do the refinancing through TIFIA. So when we look at the totals, we're at the same place. It's the flexibility that Alan's talking about to give us either option, so therefore improve our financial position with more certainty.
One other point I forgot to make was that we were doing some sort of what if or break even analysis. And so we looked at, there was about an 8 basis point advantage in doing the refinancing with the TIFIA loan. And we calculated with the help of an underwriter, how much would treasury rates have to rise between now and July for us to be essentially indifferent between refinancing now with municipals or waiting until July. and it was a similar level, around 7 or 8 basis points. So, given that the Treasury market has moved 50 basis points in less than 60 days, it's a very small break even. So we'd essentially be indifferent at that point if Treasury rates rose by only 8 basis points. So it's a very small change in Treasury rate. So that's why we're wrestling with the decision to, refinance now with municipal tax exempt bonds, or wait around until July and essentially wait and see what Treasury rates are like in July. So we'll be working with our two municipal advisors and underwriters and, making that decision. And it's somewhat market dependent based on, relative yields and demand when we come to market in March.
Okay. Any questions? Looks like, is that member Enzor?
Yeah. I just said you've got your hands full with all this.
It's a complicated, definitely decision, and we're not taking it lightly. Requires a tremendous amount of work, and we've met with rating agencies recently on the new money financing, and so we're expecting ratings in about another week, and so we're well prepared for the upcoming financing. It's just we may potentially tack on this refinancing as part of it.
Wow, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I see member Gaines has his hand up.
Oh, yes. My question is, who makes the final decision on this, Alan? Is it you, or is it you and Debbie, or you and the consultants, or is it a team approach, or how do you finally, where does the buck stop?
I think it's absolutely a team approach with everything. That includes investment decisions and financing decisions. So, it would include Jim and Deb, other members, including Chantel, Chris Thompson. We all look at these numbers. It would be with the recommendation of our two municipal advisors, PFM and Davenport. So we try to all look at the data and ask the questions and, look at the, essentially the trade-off between locking now, how much savings can we achieve, and then potentially locking in July, and how much risk we're taking and waiting until July. The other complexity is the call option structures of the two financings are different. So municipal financings typically have a 10-year call option, where the TIFIA loan is continuously callable. So in theory, the TIFIA loans have a very valuable call option, but it's difficult to exercise the call option because you're essentially refinancing typically in the municipal market at premium coupons. So it's difficult to show cash flow savings, near term. And that was one of the challenges, which is why we had not refinanced the TIFIA loan since 2008. So anyway, it's a group decision.
We have a lot of confidence in you. And, it sounds like this decision is a little, and most of the decisions are maybe more obvious than this one, I gather.
And this is Deb. Often when we're presenting the final recommendation to Jim, the staff recommendation to Jim, I look at it from a perspective of minimizing risk and minimizing regret. That sometimes you can take an action now and you know what your savings are, it's significant, and you're reducing risk. Or you could wait and see if things improve. But if you wait and see if they're going to improve, you might lose the savings that you have. And so when we're faced with that type of situation, we would have far more regret if we lost actual savings we could have, as opposed to if we refinanced and in the future there could have been a little bit more savings. So often it's a factor of minimizing regret and achieving the savings and not losing them.
I just want to pipe in here a little bit. I mean, again, Alan mentioned a couple times, we don't take this decision lightly when we have a walk going. But when he presented this to me the other day, I'm listening to the board. You're asking us to look for ways to save money. When he first brought this to me, the market was very, very favorable. It looked like we could save $40 million over the life of the loan. So when we have that kind of opportunity, unfortunately, the market doesn't wait for us or when our meetings, would coincide and stuff like that. And so, we just got to jump on these opportunities. I was very impressed, quite frankly, with Alan looking at this opportunity because it's always thought that the TIFIA loans are probably the lowest rates that you'll ever get. That's why everybody tries to get the TIFIA loans, including developers and construction folks. But when he said that, we could get the munis at possibly a lower rate just because of this crazy market that we're in, I just thought, it's an opportunity that we should at least have on the table. And that's why we wanted to bring it to you right away. We don't know what the market forces are going to do. Alan mentioned that the market's changed within the last 8 days, from when we were discussing it before. The market continues to change and it's making wild swings. Asking for your permission to look at it. If it's advantageous, we do it. If it's not, we don't.
Thanks, Jim. Jim, Deb, Alan, great teamwork on that. Do you have any other questions for the board? I'm sorry, did we have a question out there?
Make a motion that we approve the board resolution.
Thank you.
Second, Member Cox.
It looks like a second from Member Cox. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, Member Carroll. Any opposed? Great, motion is unanimous. Thank you, Alan, Deb, Jim, for the team effort on that one. And I believe that Natalie needs a second here. So, Natalie.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Natalie Henson for the record. I just wanted to let everyone know on this meeting and those watching the live stream, we've become aware that we have a technical bandwidth issue where even though members do have their video on, it's not necessarily showing up on others' computers or live stream. We have been getting phone calls about this, so I just wanted to make everyone aware who is watching the live stream and who is on the meeting. We do know that we have this issue. We're doing everything we can. The audio is being live streamed, and we just wanted to make you aware that we are aware of the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate you giving us a heads up on that, and thanks for snagging me on that one. Okay, so next up on the agenda will be our legislative report, or the update on the session. As you know, we're almost halfway there. I think tomorrow's the halfway point. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we have Mr. Brad Ryan on the line. Brad, are you there?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
Good
you,
morning
Brad.
to you and all the board members. I'm here today to provide the board with an update on the 2021 session of the Maryland General Assembly. As mentioned during last month's board meeting, we are monitoring a number of bills that impact the agency, a few of which I will provide an update to you with now. Delegate Carr introduced legislation with a cross-filed bill in the Senate from Senator King that would end the ability of the MVA to suspend vehicle registrations for those that hit the $1,000 threshold of tolled debt. The bill was approved by the House last year, yet it died in the Senate. This year, the bill was moved favorably out of the full House committee and is awaiting floor action in the House. A Senate hearing was held on the bill on February the 10th, and further committee action in the Senate is pending. We submitted letters of information for these bills, highlighting the fact that the bills could actually result in a disadvantage by prolonging the amount of time that customers have to accumulate toll debt, thereby leading to higher debts before cases are resolved. Additionally, Delegate Krim introduced legislation with a cross-file bill in the Senate from Senator King to retroactively reduce the civil penalty to $25 for each outstanding citation. We also submitted letters of information for these bills, highlighting the fact that they would result in the MDTA foregoing $162 million of the costs that are associated with collecting tolls from those who do not pay. House and Senate committee hearings have been held on these bills, but further action is pending in the Senate and is ongoing in the House. Again, this session, legislation has been introduced to allow free passage of the Broning turnaround, which would allow vehicles that use the 10.9-mile FSK facility yet do not traverse the Key Bridge itself to do so without paying a toll. A bill hearing for this bill was held last week, and we submitted a letter of information for the bill highlighting, among other things, the current toll discounts already given to vehicles using the Broning turnaround and the revenue and trust agreement impacts of the legislation. Delegate Lukey has introduced legislation to require BPW approval for the planting of any invasive or non-native species. MDTA never plants invasive species, but some of the plantings we have do require the use of a non-native, but of course, always non-invasive species. A bill hearing was held on this bill last month, where a number of state agencies submitted their concerns, specifically on decoupling non-native species with invasive species. And it is our understanding that the bill sponsor intends to amend the bill so that will only prohibit the planting of invasive species. And lastly, Senator Hershey and the House Cecil County delegation have introduced legislation to relocate the JFK toll gantry on I-95 to a location between Maryland 279 and Maryland 272, which is north of the current location, and also to prohibit the MDTA from making important improvements to the current toll plaza. A bill hearing was held in the Senate yesterday for this bill, with a House hearing pending next week. We sent a letter of information for this bill highlighting, among other things, the large fiscal note associated with the bill, the traffic diversion that it would cause to neighboring highways and roads, the safety and efficiency risk posed by the bill's prohibition on making major repairs to the existing toll plaza, and noting that the bill also violates a longstanding agreement with FHWA to keep this area free from tolls. As the chairman mentioned, right now I think tomorrow is the exact day, but we're almost at the halfway point of this year's 90-day session, and we'll be sure to keep you updated on any further information on these bills or any other bills that might be introduced that impact MDTA. And finally, in addition to monitoring the events of the Maryland General Assembly, MDTA staff continues to regularly update government officials on important updates related to the MDTA. In fact, earlier this week, MDTA staff sent email notices to hundreds of government officials regarding the Tier 1 draft environmental impact statement for the availability of the Chesapeake Bay Crossing study, along with the upcoming public hearing schedule in case those individuals wanted to share that information with their constituents. As always, I appreciate your time, and I would be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate the presentation. Do we have any questions for Mr. Ryan or his group?
Yeah, just one quick question with regard to how they calculate the fiscal impact statements. So I understand if they're looking at reducing a fee, how you can calculate that, but are they also including in the fiscal statements what the cost would be on us? You know, in the case of the JFK example of what the cost would be for moving it, what the cost would be if we're now out of compliance with our trust agreement, and if our bond rating goes down, are they including all of the different factors in the fiscal note when they're calculating it?
Yes, sir. Very strong fiscal notes were submitted for these bills, and I don't know if anyone from finance wants to jump in on that has a little more detailed information than I might have.
This is Deb. I think if Chantel is on, she would be the best person to address this. If not, I can provide some detail.
Good morning. Yes, everybody. Chantel Green, Division of Finance. So to answer your question, yes. I mean, to the extent that we're actually able to quantify some of the fiscal impacts, we certainly do that. We submit that to DLS. DLS takes that, the DLS meaning the Department of Legislative Services, they take that information and they formulate their own fiscal note impact based on the information that we provide. So yes, we did provide very comprehensive fiscal notes with respect to the fiscal impact for the legislation that Brad mentioned.
Okay. Thank you, Chantel.
Can I jump in?
Did you have a question?
Yeah, Chantel. Chantel?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Do they interact with you when they do prepare the fiscal notes?
DLS will interact with us if they have questions.
Okay.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I'm going back 100 years, but when we did this, obviously, when questions arose, we could get the back and forth from the Department of Fiscal Services. That was actually a part of the legislative services, but fiscal services would interact.
Yes, that's correct.
Before they finalize the final fiscal note, do they do that with you?
It just depends. It varies. If they have questions, they will follow up with us, and we've gone back and forth a few times on some fiscal notes, but not all of the time. Sometimes they don't have additional questions, in which case we will not hear from them before the fiscal note is published.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Any other questions for Brad and his team? Great, Brad. I want to give you a shout out. You know, we're short a person over here at TSO during the session, and your team has been fantastic in assisting with that, filling some of the gaps where we need. And you've been very responsive, you and your entire team. So thank you for that. I know that that the government affairs team certainly appreciates it. So appreciate that.
Thank
now,
you, sir. It's a team effort.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I have some good news. Chairman Slater is now able to join us. So now that he's on the line, I'm going to turn the meeting over to him. Chairman Slater, the gavel is now yours, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Sean, and good morning, everyone. I apologize for being a little bit late. I'm trying to manage the 1,000 different roles that the secretary's job comes with, and so this morning I had the WMATA board meeting deliberating the budget. At the same time, we were having our board meeting, so I've been kind of shifting back and forth. But thank you for your patience with that, and thank you, Sean, for kind of handling where we were so far. So, you know, this morning, the remaining part of our agenda is focused on the P3 that we are pursuing as a department. There are a couple of things that you're going to see this morning, and I think we're really working on this as a really at an abundance of caution, because this is the first type of endeavor we've done in the state like this, and it's the first type of facility like this that we had in the state. So I think there's some really, really important context here. But this proposal, we're going to see today is really a next step in that historic agreement between Governor Hogan and Governor Northam to replace the American Legion Bridge and relieve that congestion there. You know, the bridge itself is about 60 years old and has been operating beyond its capacity for quite some time now. You know, the daily traffic on that bridge has grown 390% since the bridge opened in 1962. Bill, were you in the legislature when that bridge opened up?
Not quite, but close.
In its current state, the American Legion Bridge really just is unable to provide reliable travel times for our commuters. It doesn't accommodate good transit because it's just too congested, so you can't put commuter bus services on it. It doesn't accommodate bicyclists or pedestrians accessing the CNO Canal. We have a hot lane proposal that would do a few things for us. One is build us a brand new bridge, adding 2 additional high occupancy toll lanes. So they would be hot lanes, a dedicated bike and pedestrian link to that CNO Canal that's safe and efficient, and really no cost access for carpoolers and transit vehicles with 3 or more. And so everybody's going to kind of benefit from this. And, it's going to open up some new transit routes as well. And, an important element of this that I really want to continue to stress is the existing lanes that are out there are free and will remain free. And so, any of the tolls that we're talking about today and throughout the course of this project are tolls for people that will choose. So, no one will be subject to a toll unless they choose to utilize those lanes. And I just want to be clear on that point because it's really important to the people that we serve and our customers. Under our hot lane proposal, we're going to continue to focus on that choice and a choice where we think much more people will benefit. And so, those who make this choice will continue to be the only ones paying. Experience in other areas has shown that people don't use these managed lanes every day. Many choose the lanes occasionally when they need to get to a meeting or an appointment or something along that line. Studies tell, I'm not sure if someone could mute for us. It's a phone ringing, I think. Studies have also tell us that even when those general purpose lanes will start to move faster because of the commuters who will be eligible that will jump into those new hot lanes at no cost, or those that choose to pay that toll. So, more than 40% of the region's population travels this segment of the Capital Beltway. The American Legion Bridge is the critical link between the economic centers of Maryland and Virginia, and a critical link for the region's supply chain. We're aware of a lot of studies that show that the National Capital Region itself is expected to grow by another 1.2 million people and add another 1 million jobs by 2040. So it's critical that we start to get out in front of this. It's critical that Maryland and Virginia continue to unite and improve the American Legion Bridge as part of this proposal. And this proposal we have before us is another step in that path. Fact that Virginia has been able to provide a lot of relief on their side of the system with implementing this type of a solution, we're going to continue to work very closely with Virginia Department of Transportation. Their lanes, the lanes that they've implemented have provided relief and improved travel times. Their research shows and their data shows that people don't use these lanes every day. It shows that 82% of their customers on their system spend less than $20 a month. It shows that 74% of the customers on Virginia's 95 express lanes spend less than $20 a month. That's not to say Maryland is planning to replicate what Virginia has done. We're planning on a system that works for Maryland drivers. And so, that collaboration we're having with Virginia will help us and the region create that network for everyone. On the local front, a lot of folks have raised some concerns and some really important conversations that we've had, and some concerns and some important conversations that we still left to have. But I should note that, as we deliberate on this and as we see these things, local priority letters all have listed high occupancy toll lanes on the American Legion Bridge as part of the plan. The long range plan at the Transportation Planning Board includes hot lanes on the American Legion Bridge. The Greater Washington Partnership Blueprint for Mobility includes hot lanes on the bridge. And the recent local proposal for the American Legion Bridge in 270 presented to the Board of Public Works by the local government called for the implementation of those managed lanes to alleviate congestion and handle that projected growth. So, although there are concerns raised and some important collaboration that we still have to work through with our stakeholders and our local government officials, we do have important work to do. The Regional Transportation Priorities Plan for the National Capital Region, published in 2014 from the National Capital Transportation Planning Board and the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, recommended a few things. We consider implementing tolling mechanisms, especially when building new lanes. That's what this proposal is. We seek to connect toll facilities in a way that allow for seamless use of such facilities. That's what this proposal is. We provide high quality transit alternatives on price lanes to provide viable alternative to driving. This proposal includes a lot of that. So this plan really is going to accomplish all three of those things laid out. From a financial perspective, there's a really important perspective here. You know, today's American Legion Bridge is structurally sound, but we know in the next 10 years, we're going to have to put a new deck on that bridge. We'll need to replace it within 15 if we don't do something, and we have to plan for that financially. The reality is, and the construction costs that come with replacing the American Legion Bridge without a partnership will impact us no matter what, and will impact our ability to do other things across the system. We're going to need a new American Legion Bridge, whether we do it with a P3 or not. But without a public-private partnership, we're going to have to find an alternative funding source. So, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that paying for an American Legion Bridge outside of the model that we have today will have a significant impact on other parts. But simply put, it's going to have, we don't have the resources right now to fully invest in our transit network, our highways, the Port of Baltimore, the airport, and our other transportation infrastructure. So we need to think innovatively. And, you know, I want to assure everyone out there listening today that, you know, our residents, our customers, all of our interested stakeholders, that as we discuss this toll setting process, both MDTA and MDOT are committed to full transparency and public input. We'll have a public comment period that's extensive and inclusive. Remember, the presentation that you're going to see today is not the start of a comment period, but it's intended to give everyone a preliminary insight into the staff's work and the process ahead. Today's update is not an official staff proposal. MDTA staff will present the official tolling proposal at an MDTA board meeting this spring. And of course, that's open to the public as well. I am really hopeful that we'll be much further advanced in our recovery from the health pandemic, and we'll be able to have some greater thoughtful dialogue in person. But at that meeting, MDTA will, again, not vote on the proposal, but could vote to formally start that public process, which will include public comment period and hearings. And we're going to go over that full process today, discuss the various comment periods, but I just want to take a minute and assure everyone that there will be many opportunities for written comments, public testimony, and conversation before the MDTA board might vote on a final staff recommendation. We anticipate that that process would be somewhere around the summer or fall of 2021. With that, I will shift to the remaining part of our agenda, starting with our super talented legal staff, Kim, and see if she can walk us through a resolution for designating our P3 program and facilities. So Kim?
Yes, thank you, Chairman and members. Kim Millender, Principal Counsel on behalf of the Maryland Transportation Authority. So what I'm presenting to you today, members, is really an amended resolution. You'll recall back in 2018, you adopted an initial resolution that preliminarily designated the P3 project as a transportation facilities project. And that designation is necessary for the MDTA board to be involved with this P3 and to exercise its tolling authority. In the original resolution that we adopted back in 2018, there were conditions upon the designation, including acquisition of a leasehold interest, which John Wedemeyer is going to be talking to you right after me, as well as the execution of a P3 agreement. And at that time, it was couched as a single P3 agreement. We now know, as the P3 project has developed, it's been broken into phases. And so really the only amendment to the resolution before you today is to allow and authorize multiple P3 agreements to be signed as each phase is developed and completed. And that's really the only change before you today. All other provisions of the prior resolution remain in effect. This is just a very slight modification amendment in order to make that clarification about multiple agreements. The designation of the project itself as a transportation facilities project remains. And I'll be happy to take any questions you might have regarding the revised resolution.
Thank you, Kim. I think the fact that we've broken it up into phases is a really important detail. You know, the original project was really, really large. You know, we seem to have a much more of a consensus around the American Legion Bridge. And so we are really, in all of these conversations, just talking about that first phase, which is the American Legion Bridge and the south side of 270 and the 270 corridor. We're not talking about the Capital Beltway beyond 270 at all. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions from members of the committee. The board?
This is Mary. I'll move for approval.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, we're just doing updates at this time, member, and we're going to be presenting these at a future meeting. So this is informational. Thank you for that, though. And we'll be back to you with the finals, I believe, at a future meeting. Thank you, member.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you all, and thanks, Kim. So with that, I'll turn it over to Will and Jeff, our project duo.
Chairman Slater, the next item on the list is lease agreement, John Wiedemeyer.
I'm sorry, I missed one. So with that, I will turn it over to John Wiedemeyer about the lease agreement.
Good morning, board. My name is John Wiedemeyer. I'm the Real Estate Services Manager for the Transportation Authority. Today, I'm presenting a draft lease agreement between MDTA and SHA for the future price managed lanes in Montgomery County. As part of the traffic relief program, public and private partnership, this leasehold is required for setting the toll rates. The exhibits attached in your files depict SHA's right-of-way within the Phase South P3 project. The price managed lanes are due to be constructed between the existing northbound and southbound travel lanes that are out there right now. A final agreement will be presented to the board at some future date. Does anybody have any questions?
As I'm fumbling with my paperwork, I do not have any questions, but any questions from members of the board?
It's Member Ardinger.
Member Ardinger?
Yes. I just to understand the lease, it's a 60-year lease. And I understand 50 years for the tolling. So are we assuming it's 10 years of construction and then?
That's my, that is my understanding, member.
Okay.
So let me kind of clarify that. I would not envision 10 years of construction. So, I think, a normal project like this, as you're trying to manage traffic, could be in that kind of 3 to 4 year range and getting things open. So I can assure you that we will not have 10 years of construction. That's just.
Thank you for clarifying, Greg.
Any other questions from members from? Member Ardinger, did that conclude your questions? I'm sorry.
It did. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions from members of the board? Great. Thank you, John. With that, I will shift to the previously mentioned update item from our project duo, Jeff and Will.
Well, good morning, Chairman Slater and members of the board. For the record, my name is Will Pines, and I'm the MDTA's Chief Operating Officer, and I'm joined today by Jeff, the co-chair for the Evaluation Committee, who I'll turn it over to introduce himself.
Yes, so thanks, Will, and Mr. Chairman, members of the authority. I appreciate the opportunity to update you on our selection of our Phase 1 developer. For the record, my name is Jeff Folden. I'm the Deputy Director for the 495-270 P3 program for the Maryland Department of Transportation State Highway Administration. Phase 1 is known as the American Legion Bridge I-270 to I-70 Relief Plan and begins south of the George Washington Memorial Parkway in Virginia, includes improvement of the American Legion Bridge and extends north to I-270, and then up I-270 all the way to I-70 in Frederick. However, our initial focus in the development and delivery will be Phase 1 South, which is that portion that includes the American Legion Bridge up to I-370. In your packets, there's a slide entitled Progressive P3 Approach, and I wanted to talk through that for a minute for the board members. Progressive P3 is different from the other P3s we've delivered in Maryland. Those use a fixed price approach. And this phase P1 is using a progressive P3, also known as a pre-development agreement. While new to Maryland, this type of P3 has been used to deliver similar managed lanes projects like this across the US. That includes in Texas for the North Tarrant Express, and in this region in Virginia for I-495, I-95, and I-395. In this progressive P3 process, we bring on our partner at a much earlier stage of project development, and they become a strategic partner with us to collaborate with MDOT, MDTA, and all of our stakeholders to further assist in defining the project requirements before we reach any committed pricing or schedule. So our solicitation process for our phase 1 developer began over a year ago, and the selection developer was recently made after that competitive process with extensive collaborative dialogue with the proposers to ensure that we develop a true partnership and harness the innovation of the private sector in advancing the goals of our P3 program. We'll be seeking the MDTA board's approval of this selected developer at a future meeting. And upon your approval, and we will then seek approval from the Maryland Board of Public Works, and we would then enter into the phase P3 agreement. This phase P3 agreement would last up to 10 years and it would govern the pre-development work only. Once that phase P3 agreement is executed, there'll be significant collaboration by the phase developer with MDOT, MDTA, and our stakeholders and the public, advancing the MDOT recommended preferred alternative within the limits of phase south. This will include a strong focus on minimizing impacts to features such as property, utilities, environmental resources, identifying and eliminating and mitigating risks through further detailed investigations, site investigations, soil borings, and looking at innovative designs and collaborating with our stakeholders and the public to ensure we're meeting their needs. This process will further develop the cost and schedule information for that phase 1 south and mitigate the potential for future cost overruns and delays once we've entered into a final contract for the final design, construction, financing, operations, and maintenance of phase 1 south. This will increase the delivery certainty of the improvements. We expect this pre-development work for phase 1 south to last about 1 year. And at the time of the completion of the pre-development work, the phase developer would submit what's called a committed section proposal that would outline its fixed pricing and schedule to complete the final design, construction, financing, operations, and maintenance of phase 1 south. And this would only occur after we've completed the environmental review process under the National Environmental Policy Act related to phase 1 south. And once that committed section proposal has been agreed to by MDOT and MDTA staff, we'd be coming back to you to seek approval of that committed section proposal, and then ultimately the Maryland Board of Public Works. Upon that approval, the Section P3 agreement would be entered into for a term of 50 years to complete the final design, construction, financing, operations, and maintenance for phase 1 south. And over that 10-year period, the similar process will be followed for the phase 1 north to advance it through the pre-development process, then ultimately to a committed section proposal. Turning to your next slide is the MDOT recommended preferred alternative, which was announced last month. So I want to just talk through this a little bit so you understand what it is. I think Chairman Slater may have hit on some of this already, but this recommended preferred alternative is what the phase 1 developer will be collaborating with our stakeholders to further as part of the pre-development work. The MDOT recommended preferred alternative would add 2 high occupancy toll lanes in each direction across the new American Legion Bridge to I-270. And then on I-270 to 370, it would add 1 hot lane and convert the highway's existing HOV lane into a hot lane in each direction. So throughout the limits of phase 1 south, this would provide a 2-lane hot managed lane system in each direction. Also, a new bicycle pedestrian connection will be added across the American Legion Bridge, linking to a new trail in Virginia being developed as part of their I-495 Next project and linking into Maryland near the C&O Canal. We would also be improving additional bike and pedestrian access at interchanges throughout the phase 1 south area and making environmental enhancements to the corridor. The concept would deliver this new American Legion Bridge, provide new expanded transit options for the region, add bicycle and pedestrian connections, relieve congestion, and create jobs and business opportunities throughout the region. These hot lanes would provide new opportunities for faster, more reliable suburban transit through free usage of the hot lanes for buses, and will provide ramp connections to transit and activity centers for easy access. The lanes would also allow that transit connection across the American Legion Bridge between Maryland and Virginia. That's just not possible today because of the bridge bottleneck. We'd also expect the hot lanes to boost ride sharing, since van pools and cars with 3 or more people could use the hot lanes for free. It's important to note the existing lanes will remain free, so everyone can use those lanes as they would today, but they would move faster. And drivers can also choose to use the hot lanes, whether if they have 3 or more people, or if they only have 1 or 2 people, they could choose to pay a toll for a critical trip. So everyone will benefit from hot lanes, whether they choose to use them or not. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Will to discuss the solicitation and evaluation process for selecting the Phase 1 developer.
Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, I'm going to talk about the solicitation process, which begins on slide 4 of your packet. The MDOT and MDTA team used a 2-step RFQ and RFP process for this procurement, which is similar to other past best value procurements used around the state. The RFQ, or request for qualification step, develops a short list of proposers who have the most highly qualified skills, experience, and capabilities to perform the contract work. In this specific case, 4 firms submitted statements of qualifications, and all 4 firms were determined to be sufficiently qualified to move forward to the RFP phase. In July of 2020, the draft request for proposals, or RFP, was provided to the shortlisted teams. And over the next 6 months, MDOT and MDTA collaboratively participated in an exhaustive process with potential proposers through 30 meetings and responding to over 1,500 questions, and again, collaboratively considering technical and commercial terms. The shortlisted teams were provided important key assumptions to provide a level and fair playing field for the teams to develop their proposals. Moving into your packet on the proposals received, in December of last year and January of this year, technical and financial proposals were respectively received from 3 shortlisted teams. And I'm going to just read directly from the slide to explain who those teams were. The first team noted is Accelerate Maryland Express Partners. The project lead developer and equity group for this project was Itinera Infrastructure and Concessions, Inc. The lead contractor was Halmar International LLC and Itinera SPA. The designers for this team were Atkins North America and Gannett Fleming. The second team noted is Accelerate Maryland Partners LLC, and the lead project developer and equity firm for this was Transurban Operations Inc., and that's their USA group, and Macquarie Infrastructure Development LLC. The lead contractors for this were also Transurban and Macquarie, and Jeff will talk a little bit more about that structure further in the presentation. And the designers for this group were Dewberry Engineers Inc. and Stantec Consulting Services Inc. And finally, Capital Express Mobility Partners, which was made up of Centra Global SE and John Lang Investments Limited, and Ferrovial Agrimorn for the contractor team, and their designers were AECOM Technical Services and HNTB. So moving into the evaluation process, the team performed an extensive evaluation process that was ultimately broken into 3 steps, where proposals were evaluated initially for responsiveness and on a pass-fail basis. Next, the technical and financial review teams with subject matter experts with 500 years of combined experience independently reviewed those proposals. The review teams then deliberated on the proposals over the course of 120 hours in 15 meetings to provide their recommendations. After the review team's deliberations were complete, the teams independently and separately presented their recommendations to the evaluation committee. The evaluation committee was comprised of 15 MDOT, MDTA, and outside experts with over 300 years of combined experience, and also included community advisors from Montgomery and Frederick counties and an observer from Federal Highway Administration. The evaluation committee met over 6 full-day meetings with more than 50 hours of deliberations. Finally, Jeff and I, the evaluation committee co-chairs, presented the staff recommendations to the MDOT secretary, MDTA executive director, and the MDOT SHA administrator. Following review and discussion, the selection committee determined to accept the staff recommendation. Now, moving into package page 7, which is the evaluation criteria. The pre-development work proposal and financial proposals had specific evaluation criteria defined within the RFP. The technical and financial proposals were approximately equal in determining the best value selection. The specific pre-development work proposal criteria were delivery certainty, minimize impacts, maximize value to the state, congestion relief, and opportunity MDOT/community benefits. The criteria were evaluated using an adjectival rating process with exceptional, good, acceptable, and unacceptable ratings, with a plus-minus option on the acceptable, good, and exceptional ratings. Weightings were applied to the criteria, including critical, significant, and important, where critical criteria were approximately 3 times the importance of important, and significant criteria were approximately 2 times. As outlined in the request for proposals, financial proposals were evaluated based on defined points with a total possible points of 1,791 points. Breaking those specific financial proposal points criteria down further, criteria areas were equity, internal rate of return, developer closing costs, development rights, payment, pre-development work cost, and contractor general conditions, costs, and markup at the specific points denoted in your work package and on the screen. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Jeff to walk you through what the state is getting.
Thanks, Will. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the state will be getting from the selected developer, Accelerate Maryland Partners. Accelerate Maryland Partners provides a strong understanding of the project with a well-thought-out approaches to manage and mitigate project-specific risks, including design solutions that they are furthering to reduce property impacts, reduce potential utility conflicts, and to provide environmental stewardship, such as pursuing additional water quality enhancements above the minimum requirements. They've also committed to delivering all of Phase South, that's American Legion Bridge to I-370, as a single section with no funding from Maryland and a financial close by fall of 2022. The proposal also provided commitments for additional improvements during the construction of Phase 1 South to address Vision Zero goals by providing improved and safer bicycle and pedestrian connections. They committed to providing over the operating term transit improvements in Montgomery County, estimated at approximately $300 million, community grant program estimated at $50 million, grants for emerging technologies, such as connected autonomous vehicles, estimated $25 million, all of which will be further developed during the pre-development work in collaboration with our local stakeholders. The team also offered the state a $145 million development rights fee for the exclusive right of first refusal to develop Phase 1. And that would be payable back to the state upon financial close of Phase 1 South. The team also outlined a comprehensive approach to dealing with local workforce development, including small minority disadvantaged and veteran-owned businesses, working with local unions and contractors, and engagement with local communities and organizations, educational institutions to further training programs for workers. So in your last slide, I want to talk for a second about next steps. Our current plan and schedule is to bring this to the MDTA board for approval in March of this year. So we'd be seeking approval of the selection and the Phase P3 agreement. Subject to your approval, we'd move forward with the legislative review process for 30 days, scheduled around April of this year. And then once the legislative review process has been completed with the comptroller and the treasurer, we'd move forward with submitting the Phase P3 agreement to the Maryland Board of Public Works for approval in May. Upon approval of that P3 agreement, we would execute it and then begin the Phase 1 South pre-development work in earnest. We'd be working over the next year, expecting by May of next year to have a committed section proposal for Phase 1 South that we could then bring back to you for review and approval in the spring of next year, and then ultimately the Maryland Board of Public Works in the summer of next year. Assuming we get approvals from both yourselves and the Maryland Board of Public Works, we'd be moving forward with the financial close of the section fall of next year. And that would allow the final design, construction, financing, operations, and maintenance for the 50-year term to begin. So at this time, I appreciate your time and attention to this presentation, and Will and I can take any questions from the members.
Thank you, Jeff and Will. I know it was a huge lift to get us where we are, and I know many of you spent a lot of long days and nights and weekends with a large team reviewing. So I think it was a really, really important effort, and I thank you guys for that. But I don't have any questions, but I think I've been seeing things every day. So at this point, I'll ask if there are any questions from members of the board.
I just have a question. As part of the RFP process for the additional items that are being besides the new infrastructure, so it's the loan program, the program Vision Zero, etc. How was that framed in the RFP? I guess my question is, if let's say the value of all that is $300 million and they've lumped that into their financial proposal and it works for them, is that how we would want $300 million or whatever the benefit is spent? Or is there negotiability in that if, let's say we want more in a community, in the community grant program, the fleets, and we don't, and we don't need the Vision Zero? I'm just curious about that.
So during the pre-development work, there would be negotiability in the exact commitments. So we'll be working through that with the phase developer and our partners. So the commitments that they put in there, the financial commitments, were viewed as solutions to move forward, but they were not firm financial commitments from the numbers perspective. We understand that they will be negotiated in the end, not only with MDOT, MDTA, but our stakeholders and partners.
Now, Jeff, just for clarification purposes, those things were not actually utilized as part of the review of the financial package, correct?
That's correct. They were not. The financial package was focused on certain financial factors and markups and things like the development rights fee, but anything related to these commitments were separate and distinct from the financial proposal.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Is that, did that complete your question, Member Rosen? Thank you.
Yes.
Member Gaines? Member Gaines, you have a question?
Yeah, I was trying to just follow our proposed schedule. And so next month, we're going to be approving, hopefully, the Phase P3 agreement. It says there's selection and P3 agreement, but then on the next sprint, a year later, we're going to approve the section P3 agreement again and committed. Okay, we're adding the section proposal to that. Is that right? So that's the difference.
Yes, that's correct. The pre-development, the phase one pre-development agreement is for pre-development work only. The section agreement next year would actually move forward with final design, construction, financing, operations, and maintenance.
Upon agreement. So
yes,
when you say a financial close, that doesn't mean we start construction, does it? That means we start final design? Is that what it is?
Correct. Final design would start in potentially any early construction works that may be available, like utility relocations or potentially early, early structure work at the American Legion Bridge is potential examples.
Right. So, I mean, you might be getting something going next year as far as groundbreaking.
Correct.
I have another question. The American Legion Bridge, is Virginia paying for a portion of the cost down there? And how much, what's the breakdown of usage between Maryland and Virginia residents? Do we know that?
Jeff, you might know the breakdown on usage. I know, we had this Capital Beltway Accord. So, Virginia owns roughly 21% of the bridge. And so what we've agreed to is on the general purpose lanes, as they reconstruct in terms of the cost, we're going to split those based on ownership. And then the tolled lanes, we're going to split those 50-50. So it's kind of a breakdown of kind of where that goes. But Jeff, you might have some of those hard numbers in front of you, or Will.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I apologize.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I don't know the exact breakdown off the top of my head between Maryland, Virginia drivers. I believe it's slightly more on the Virginia side. I can certainly get those numbers and follow back up with the members, whether it be next month or in the meantime, but we can certainly get that data for you.
We own to the Virginia shoreline and straight up. So we own the majority of the bridge itself.
As Jeff mentioned, this was the update item. We will come back with the eventual approval item. So at that point, we'll make sure we're ready to answer that question, Member Gaines.
Thank you.
Member Gaines, I might add that, the reason the team chose to go with this pre-development approach is, there are a lot of stakeholders in a project like this. And, what we wanted to avoid was, something very similar to what we saw on the Purple Line, where, you get out there, you agree on a price, and then, things happen or things come up and you end up with big change orders or cost overruns and those types of things. So this gives us the ability to bring a developer on board, work through all those kind of final details and collaboration before we agree on a price, and avoid those kind of extra costs later on that might come up.
Very good. Thank you.
Member Von Paris?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple of comments. First of all, I agree what was said about the MDTA team, Will, Jeff, Deb, others who've been involved in this project thus far. Looks like they've done a first-class job, and I've got a lot of respect for all of those involved. As a board member, I guess I have this question. Was there anything in, because like, for example, when I go to vote on this, eventually, I'm going to be saying, well, what risks are out there for MDTA? What are our risks? And so my question is, and maybe we have done this, but was there any criteria in place as part of the evaluation process to consider the risks to MDTA? Because I was reading, I read the agreement. I saw some things that, yes, we have the 145, but there could be, I don't know if the proper term, but a clawback if we don't do something A, B, and C. So I just, I think this is what we are, our mission as an organization is to help facilitate this. I support that. But my evaluation is going to be, what risk do we have, and have we taken that into consideration in the evaluation of the winners? And I'm not, I'll stop right there, I guess, at that point. Thank you.
So member Von Paris, I think I can field this one. That's exactly why MDTA members were brought onto the team right from the very beginning and in the development of the RFP itself. Much of the criteria that was set up, there were things like interoperability and experience in relation to how the vendors had to manage tolling on other projects that we were able to evaluate through the process. That were part of the details of the evaluation criteria. And certainly the MDTA team members that were involved during the proposal evaluation did consider those facts and used the subject matter experts that were on the team to provide insights into how capable the different proposers would be in relation to protecting MDTA's interests, but also just generally what's in the best interest of the state as a whole. As Greg mentioned, there's certainly a lot of interest in this project from making sure that we do right by the community and right by the state and learn from the lessons that have happened on other projects. And so there was a very diverse panel that's formed here with subject matter experts from just about every area of expertise you can think of. And they provided great insights to make sure that MDTA's interests are protected and that risks were fully evaluated.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Member Gaines, did you have another question?
Yeah, another question.
Sure.
It kind of follows up on John's concerns. And some of these P3 projects have gone bust, have they not? And I guess you guys are obviously aware of that and are taking that into account when you're evaluating these proposals. I can't tell you the specific ones, but I know I've read about them where the projects had to be abandoned and wasn't pleasant for anyone.
Yes, before we started this process, and maybe Jeff can talk a little bit about some of them because he's kind of dug into it, a lot of it with our team. But we wanted to look at where they went right and where they went wrong across the country. The one that seems to always come up is the Indiana toll road and that perspective. And then so there's a couple of scenarios in most of the issues, and when things like that arise, what happens is the financiers come in and actually take over. And so, they come in, they operate those types of things, the bondholders, or they resell the project. Sometimes these things get kind of sold in terms of interest. But Jeff, maybe you expand a little bit on some of the ones that we did look at to make sure that we were good.
Yeah, we looked, obviously across the country and across the world at P3s, both lessons learned and best practices. And that's part of the reason we landed on this pre-development approach is what we see is by doing this, we really can get the right partner, best understand the risks and best understand everything up front before entering into that long-term agreement. And that really limits the risk of any of these bankruptcies. I mean, one of the most ones we've seen though is like the SH-130 in Texas, where they entered into the agreement. They built the road, it got into operations, but due to the economic downturn, the toll revenues weren't coming back in where they expected them, and it went bankrupt. So the bondholder stepped in, reformed the special protection company, and continued to operate the road with no impact to users. But I think one of the most critical things we've seen is on these managed lane type projects, there's never been a bankruptcy. So the one I referred to, SH-130, was like a new toll road on a new alignment. But whenever anyone's built managed lanes similar to the I-95 ETLs, we've never seen a bankruptcy on any P3s.
I think it's also important to note that, we could say the same thing about every project delivery method. There's design bid build projects that fail and design build. And so this is one of the tools in the tool belt. And, you could find examples of issues that crop up on every project. And we try to, leverage the experience from all of our projects to bring forward in evaluating this one.
Thanks, Will and Jeff. I'm not seeing any more of our virtual hands up, so.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Would a performance bond be applicable in a situation such as this?
So they did have to provide performance security and bonding. So that is part of what they've submitted. I think I'm trying to remember the exact value. It was either $10 or $20 million. So that is part of it. There's also, they are, for lack of a better word, cash flowing or fronting the pre-development costs. And they can only get reimbursed those pre-development costs if they can successfully perform their obligations and reach financial close of that phase 1 south. So there's also the development rights fee that they've provided a letter of credit for, that if they don't perform their obligations, we can then draw on that letter of credit. So we've got a lot of protections in place for the state.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the board? Great, thank you, Will and Jeff. I think, Jeff, you stay up and we shift to Deb and Jeff instead of Will and Jeff.
Good morning, members. This item, I think, is going to dovetail on some of the conversations that you were just having. The purpose of this item is to discuss the P3 agreement. The MDTA board is anticipated to be asked to approve at the March board meeting. This month's update walks through various tolling related elements of the P3 agreement. Jeff Folden, who you just met, and I will discuss the various documents included in your materials. Your materials include the phase P3 agreement. When presented next month, the agreement will be updated to reflect the selected developer proposal. The document in your board book reflects the form of the P3 agreement. Also, to complement the agreement is a term sheet for the phase P3 agreement. The term sheet organizes key elements of the agreement. Also is Exhibit 6 extracts that focuses on tolling. Exhibit 6 describes the technical requirements. Also is a Section P3 term sheet, as well as the tolling service agreement term sheet, And lastly, the executed interagency agreement between MDTA and MDOT that's dated April 25th, 2019. This document was provided as a reference. So the P3 agreement will incorporate the RFP exhibits, and the developer's proposal. Collectively, these documents exceed 1,000 pages. The complete RFP and exhibits can be found on the P3 program website. Off of the main homepage, it's found under P3 information tab. So today's discussion will not seek an approval. Instead, it's intended to begin to familiarize the members with the P3 agreement and the documents to be incorporated into that agreement. So recapping some of the comments from Chairman Slater, Jeff, and Will, phase 1 will include improvements from the vicinity of the GW Parkway in Virginia and I-270 to I-70, and as stated by Chairman Slater, includes the replacement of the American Legion Bridge. Not just to highlight a couple points that were made in the prior presentation, the multi-step progressive P3 or pre-development approach is being utilized. This upfront approach focuses on advancing the preliminary design of phase 1 by considering stakeholder feedback to further avoid and minimize impacts to environmental resources, communities, properties, and utilities. This approach differs from previous P3 approaches pursued by the state and the pre-development work may include the development of design, schedule, supporting MDOT and community outreach and engagement, and to further minimize impacts, to develop cost estimates, traffic and revenue studies, and creating financing arrangements and developing regional transit services that were included in MOUs with affected counties. Hence the distinction between the P3 agreement and the section agreements that we'll talk about in just a minute. So as Jeff indicated, afterwards, there will be section agreements to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain the managed lanes within the phase at no net cost to the state, and these will be presented to the MDTA board and BPW for approval. So MDTA is a partner with SHA in the delivery of this project via the interagency agreement previously approved by the board. SHA will act as MDTA's agent in the solicitation, program management, delivery of the P3 program, except for those responsibilities involving setting, collecting, enforcing tolls and fees. Those activities can only be taken by the board and/or MDTA's executive director. So when we begin discussing the documents that are attached, Jeff and I can walk through each document individually, or we can focus more directly on those topics that are specific to tolling. So, is there a preference with the board members?
I think, I just kind of speak from my perspective, Deb, that I do think it's, there's going to be a lot more discussion on some of the contractual components. And so, for the purpose of this board, I think probably more interested in some of the tolling and how it would function, because it's kind of a new facility for us. But I would really defer to the board if there's a different wish.
So, okay. Then,
I vote tolling.
Okay.
Okay. So, I'll start off in the summary memo that's included in your board members. Under the analysis, we talk about these different documents at a high level, but I'm going to go to the documents themselves, starting with the term sheet for the phase P3 agreement. Rather than walking through the actual agreement, what the term sheet does is it takes and organizes key components of the agreement by topic. So the first thing that you'll note has to do with the parties. And the parties to this agreement are MDOT, MDTA, and the phase developer. And then, as I just stated, through the interagency agreement, MDOT SHA is acting as our agent. So next, I'm going to scroll down to area 5, which is committed section proposal. So this is where the agreement acknowledges that under the section will be the final design, construction, financing, tolling, operations, maintenance, and handback. And MDOT will deliver a draft section agreement, a draft tolling services agreement, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, MDTA's financing documents to the phase developer within 90 days, effective date of the P3 agreement. Now, the financing documents, that an example of them are a trust agreement. And in prior board discussions, we've talked about how we're going to have a separate trust for this project. We'll provide an update on those documents next month. We won't be seeking approval at that time. And then, if in despite of the good faith efforts, the parties are unable to form these agreements, then the phase P3 agreement will be terminated and the phase developer will not be entitled to any costs. Now, if the phase developer fails to exercise good faith efforts, then it would be considered a default on the behalf of the phase developer. So next, I'm referring to item 6, and that is if MDOT accepts the committed section proposal and then the MDTA board or BPW fails to accept the section proposal, let me enlarge my print. Then, I'm sorry, if MDTA board or BPWs fail to approve the section P3 agreement, then the phase developer may be entitled to its allowed costs from MDOT for pre-development work on that section and any future sections still under development. So next I'm jumping down to number 11, which has to do with toll system integrator and toll system operator. So at the phase developer level, the phase developer will be required to obtain MDOT and MDTA's approval for a toll system integrator and toll system operator. The minimum qualifications are addressed in Exhibit 6, and we'll spend some time walking through Exhibit 6 because that's where a lot of the technical requirements are, including the requirements for tolling. And then we're going to require the same toll integrator and system operator to be used across the entire phase unless it's agreed upon by us. And this is important for us because when a customer travels across different sections, to them, that's a single trip. And the developer is responsible for forming that single trip. And by having this single integrator and operator, it reduces risk in forming that single trip and therefore reduces customer service or potential customer service issues. So next, I'm going to scroll down to number 24. And you'll see with indemnification that the phase developer will provide MDOT, MDTA, MDOT SHA, and the state and the respective officers, agents, representatives, and employees with indemnities that are customary for a transaction of this nature. Okay, so that's the highlights for specific to tolling involving the term sheet. Before moving off of the term sheet, are there any questions?
Deb, just one comment there. I think, really important detail because we've thought a lot about that, the proposal if, we don't obtain one of the approvals later on down the road and kind of the risk part to the state. And so, I think my focus on that has been really about, we know that what the life of the American Legion Bridge is, and we know that at some point we're going to have to replace that. So as we focus pre-development work on that, any expense for pre-development that we would have to pay, we would then get those designs as a product for that payment back in, so it wouldn't be kind of a wasted amount of money. So I think that's just kind of where my focus is, so that we're making sure that we're using those dollars as best we can and getting a product for any payment that we'd have to make in return. But let me turn to members of the board for a second. Member Gaines?
Yes, our phase, I mean, having come to, selected a phase developer, and we're hoping to come to agreement and get that signed up shortly. And then in a year, we're gonna have the section developer agreement, section development agreement. Now, is that gonna cover all three parts of, of the south and the two north sections? Or is it just gonna be the south portion? Or we start all over with the other phases?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Jeff, would you like to answer that question?
Sure, Deb. Once again, just for the record, Jeff Folden, MDOT Deputy Director for the 495 and 270 P3 program. So the section agreement next year would only cover phase 1 south. That's American Legion Bridge up to 370. There would be future section agreements that will be worked over the 10-year pre-development term to come to agreements for the phase north portion. So that's 370 up to 70. And that will also be subject to a separate National Environmental Policy Act study that MDOT will be initiating in the future.
The phase that you would not, you'd keep the same, hopefully keep the same phase developer, I guess, and just come up with new sectional agreements. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So the phase developer is the same for the 10 years. The section developer has to be, I'll say, majority owned by the phase developer.
Right.
So the equity investors have to be own at least 51% of the section.
Thank you.
Member Arger?
Thank you. So Secretary Slater, to your point, and I'm looking at sections 6 and 7 of the terms. So my understanding is the most that MDOT could be on the hook at this point would be, I think it's 54.3 for the phase south and 50 for phase north. But in return, we then get value for that because we now have the plans for the bridge. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Partially. I actually think the costs are capped at 50 million, but Jeff would be, and so anything above 50 would be at their risk that they cannot reimburse. But the rest of it, that's correct. We would get those products back. Is that accurate, Jeff?
Yeah, so that's correct. So for phase south, our maximum exposure is $50 million in allowed documentable costs. They've proposed spending up to 54.3 million on that phase south. And if they do reach the financial close, they would get reimbursed that $54.3 million for phase south as part of the section agreement. But if for any reason they don't reach financial close and it's not their fault, we would then have the exposure of that $50 million.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, not seeing any more hands. Deb, please jump on to the next section.
Okay, so the next document in your board book is the actual agreement. And I'm gonna skip that. That is the narrative version of the term sheet that we just walked through. So I'm scrolling through and I believe it's Exhibit 6 is the next document. I just want to get there myself. Sorry. One more second. Okay, yes. So the next document is extracts from Exhibit 6. Now, Exhibit 6, this is technical requirements, and the technical requirements are broader than just tolling. It's everything, maintenance. Jeff, are there a couple other examples that you can give of Exhibit 6, the comprehensiveness of it?
Sure. I mean, Exhibit 6 really focuses on all the performance requirements that they do for design. That's everything from structures, highway, water, stormwater drainage, just as a few examples. And it also covers the operations and maintenance performance requirements and key performance indicators, and ultimately what's required at the end of the term to hand back over the asset back to the state.
And so this item, the materials that are in your book, what we tried to do is out of this very large document, pull in the pieces that are relevant to tolling. And so I guess I'm starting with 1.2. I'll call off the number as highlighting different areas. The phase developer shall ensure the work that's delivered coordinates across the phase, and they have to ensure toll system interoperability and the capability of the section developers to provide the consolidated trip across all sections. That's what I talked about just a second ago. In 1.9, they're providing tolling. And I know that the board members are familiar with our 3G contracts, how we have the lane side is operated by CAPS, and then the back office is TransCore. So under the toll service agreement, the developer is performing all the types of work that CAPS does. The trip is formed, image review occurs, and they pass that transaction over to our back office. That's the framework for this arrangement and agreement with the developer. So they're responsible for performing all the toll work needed to deliver the phase, including designing and construction and coordinating. They're going to have to draft a ConOps for the tolling system and incorporate the business rules that we've laid out. And all of this requires MDTA's approvals. There's under 4.6, there's also an educational awareness program where they need to work with MDOT and MDTA by making sure that the public is aware of the P3 program and the benefits and the tolling and how it functions, and just that proactive educational awareness program that will help make for a better road and a better experience for customers that choose to use the managed lanes, as well as those that choose to use the general purpose lanes, because as Chairman Slater indicated, that's one of the great benefits of managed lanes projects, is both the customers that use the managed lanes as well as the general purpose customers both receive benefit.
Can I ask
Under
a
19 points, sure.
Absolutely, member, please.
Okay, Deb, on this point, with the interreaction and the obviously reaching out to the public, and obviously it's only a small percent of the public really pays any attention. But is this what at this point, where is that taking place?
Wait. What do you mean by what?
With the public input, where we as far as in tolling and all the information that the public needs to know, where in the process are we going to be getting out to the public?
Absolutely, that would be in the official toll setting process, and there's a hearings as well, Deb, right?
That's right. In the next agenda item, item 9, we'll talk about toll rates and toll rate ranges. Okay.
I was just talking about reaching out in general as far as information regarding P3.
So MDOT, particularly MDOT SHA, will work with the section developer regarding a communication plan and what these outreach efforts will look like.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Member Cox, I think when we talk about the toll rates in the next section, we will talk a little bit about the process and what the board's role is and how we go through that, and then opportunities for the public to provide input and feedback, because they're going to do that as part of the process, but I'm sure they'll be doing that as part of our hearing or as part of our MDTA board meetings as well. So
Yeah, I recognize that, but I'm just, trying to be a little bit ahead as far
absolutely.
as getting it out. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the reasons we're doing this so early. We haven't done that before, provided kind of that level of thinking, that draft piece, until we started the process in previous type things, because this is kind of a new thing for us. So we want to make sure people are getting an initial look to be able to digest it. Well, and frankly, so the board can get an initial look and start to digest kind of what this looks like.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I would also add that you have spoken with several reporters. We were speaking with reporters last night and early this morning, and word's getting out. They're already writing articles. Matter of fact, they're already posting them before this meeting.
Right.
So
word is actually, I saw one early.
Yeah, this is part of it, right. This is part of the process. Normally, we would come to you for approval right away, but we decided that we wanted you all to have the benefit of seeing this early, getting it out there. We're not starting the public hearing process yet, because that comes later. However, it will start dialogue in the public, I'm sure.
Good, thank you.
And I think we want it to. So go ahead, Deb, please.
So then under 19.7.2, the Managed Lanes Traffic and Toll Operations Center, they're required to operate this center, and it'll have an interface into the chart system, which also relates to the toll signage. Will integrate into chart, because with the overhead signs, customers will know what the toll rates are beforehand, and that toll rate, even if it changes, the customer will be charged the toll rate that they see when they made their decision to choose to use the managed lanes. And then if they drive even further than what the toll signage initially showed, there'll be additional signs so they can make that choice again, or exit exit off of the managed lanes. So there's this integration with the toll signage into chart, and then they have an operations center that's responsible for tolling operations and its location and the coordination that needs to happen. 19.7.3 talks some more about the integration of these signs and toll rates. And then we get to the big piece, the Article 24 of Exhibit 6. And this is where we really dive deep into electronic toll collection infrastructure. And, much of this information, working with our own tolling consultant experts, working with P3 tolling experts, and then MDTA staff, we were all very heavily involved in the drafting of this language. And so this part we'll walk through slower, because this is really the meat of the technical requirements for tolling. And the first is the scope of the work. You can see that the phase developer shall develop, fabricate, test, integrate, deploy, construct, operate, maintain, and upgrade to maintain the electronic toll collection system to support electronic tolling in the price managed lanes in accordance with the toll service agreement, which we'll talk about that document next. The system, of course, has to accurately detect and classify vehicles as outlined in the toll service agreement. You'll see that the vehicle classifications, they're consistent with MDTA's existing facilities, because again, to a customer, this is a Maryland toll road, and having that consistent customer experience has been important to MDTA as well as MDOT and MDOT-SHA. So they're going to provide proof of the transactions to us. They're going to, in 24.2, a tolling strategy, they're going to develop one. to form the single trip, to include dynamic tolling within the toll rate range and the soft rate cap that we'll talk about in a few minutes under item 9. Their you know, at 24.2.2 goes into detail about their strategy, their toll strategy plan that they must develop. And then 24.3 talks about the design requirements that again is consistent and aligns with the way the MDTA's experience and expectations. The operational requirements are addressed. Performance requirements, which we'll talk about that some more also under Article 25, about the quality of transactions that expected. And then we address staffing, the toll system integrator, which we talked about before, how there has to be the approval. And then we indicate minimum requirements in 24.7.1. And these minimum requirements closely align with the requirements we had in our 3G contracts. Again, like that was our expectation. When we put out that RFP, we wanted the best in breed for these services. And that's the same thing that we want for this project. And that's why there's minimum qualifications you see in this document as well as what we've used in the past. Next, under 24.7.2 is the proposal of the toll system integrator and, you know, the process for us to evaluate them in order to reach an agreement. We talk about testing and commissioning and, you know, testing programs. So as I keep moving forward, then we have the interface into our back office system is under 24.8.2. And then there has to be demonstrations, you know, where they need to show us that the system works as designed. This document talks about ETC design, you know, whether it's preliminary design and deliverables. You know, and then we get into, there's all kinds of reporting requirements afterwards. You know, you can see the various reports, traffic and revenue, HOV declarations are examples of them. And then you see the deliverables. There's a table full of deliverables that they'll be required to provide. And then we reach Article 25, which is the operations and maintenance phase. And as I said before, they're forming the transaction. There'll be a completed transaction that comes over to the MDTA. And if, you know, so for example, under 25.6.1 ETC operations, you know, we talk about how they have to detect the vehicle, they have to read the vehicle, and they have to capture the image. And a term you'll see us use is something called a valid transactions. And a valid transaction meets these performance requirements so that we can make sure that the right vehicle is being charged the right toll. And without, if we do not receive a valid transactions, then the developer will not be paid for that transaction. So, and now this is just specifics that we get into about that quality. An example would be 25.6.1.3. We talk about the image capture and the quality. You know, we require a video monitoring section, a system that helps us be able to ensure the quality. And if there was a customer question or issue, we can go back to that monitoring system and see the transaction as it was formed. You know, there's high occupancy vehicle enforcement, because in a minute we'll talk about HOV 3+. Our preliminary thinking is that that would be free passage on the managed lanes. You can see under the requirements, we talk about security and protection and monitoring that needs to occur. And then we, customer service, we make it really clear under 25.6.1.8 about customer service and the importance that we place on that. And then that leads us into the performance requirements that are set out, and monitoring and auditing. And it require independent test environments. And then a maintenance management information system, often called a MOM system, that helps us and MDOT ensure that these systems are being taken care of and producing accurate transactions. And then we get to a table. It's table 25.6, and it's the performance requirements. Much of these requirements are requirements that we have on our own system. And it's KPIs that are required. And if they fail to make these KPIs, it results in adjustments to what they are paid. And so, we start at 15.1 about usable images, and the trip and how it's formed, and messaging, and making sure the image is associated with the right vehicle and the proper classifications. These are all standards that we hold our integrators to as well. So, I won't go through and read each one of these, but you can see that we've got a list of 28 different KPIs. Then in a second, when we get to the toll service agreement, one of the things that's important with KPIs also are there's provisions that if we think something's happened with their system, that they're missing their KPIs, but they're missing them to a point, we have the ability to stop processing those transactions, and they have to address them. And not paying the developer for toll transactions, would require very swift action on their part. But we held that right for us because of the value that we place on customer service. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the toll service agreement. But before I move on to the next document, which is the Section P3 agreement, are there any questions regarding the technical requirements?
Just one for me, Deb. I assume it will be kind of seamless with our existing operations and our back office and everything along that line.
That's correct, Chairman. To a customer, sorry, I'm getting feedback. To a customer, the transaction, if they're driving on the ICC or the managed lanes across the American Legion Bridge, to them it's a toll transaction, and it'll come out of one Easy Pass account for them. It'll be one replenishment. If they happen to be a pay-by-plate customer, it's going to be the same back off, the same experience that they receive elsewhere in the state.
Great, thank you. Member Arger?
So Deb, if I understand correctly, we will have some, we are expected to provide some services during the tolling process. If there's a glitch on our part, and I don't know if this is even possible, do we have the ability, will we receive notification? Do we have the ability to cure that so that we're in no way held responsible? Or I shouldn't say held responsible, but can somehow mitigate that?
Yeah, so we have to, the approach we have to take is to mitigate that risk, because we are providing a service, the back office service. Now, we require the developer to be able to buffer transactions, and we have the ability, if we're doing maintenance or a changeover or some type of issue that we've experienced, that we can notify them they're buffering transactions, and then they'll send them over to us to process. And so that's discussed in the toll service agreement to mitigate that risk.
Thank you, Deb. Any other questions from members of the board? Let me jump in and kind of clear something up. I was getting some notes from our emails from some of our local partners who were concerned that we were going to the Board of Public Works in March. We are not going to the Board of Public Works in March. We will be in front of the MDTA board in March. That will start a 30-day review from the legislature, Board of Public Works, and everyone before that goes to the Board of Public Works in that, late April, early May timeframe. So is that correct, Jeff and Deb? I just want to make sure people are not confused about that, and that it's an opportunity not only for public feedback, but also the legislature to review any contract.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you're correct.
Okay, thank you. Just want to clear that up. Sorry if I threw you off, Deb.
No problem. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions about Exhibit 6, we're going to move to a term sheet for the section developer. The specifics of that will be negotiated as part of the pre-development work, but the term sheet highlights key elements of it, and the term sheet was included in the RFP and will be incorporated into the P3 agreement. So again, I'm going to highlight those areas specific to tolling. So the first thing you'll notice is MDOT, MDTA, and the section developers are all parties to the agreement. And then under number 5, as customary, MDOT and MDTA will make representations and warranties. Again, these are customary representations and warranties. And then, I'm scrolling down to, item 20. There's a handback requirement. So the section developer will be responsible for the O&M work on the maintained facilities and will hand over the responsibility of O&M to the general purpose lanes to MDOT SHA. And then 24 with handback obligations. So 5 years prior to the end of the term, the section developer, MDOT and MDTA will conduct annual inspections to assess the condition and agree on a plan for the work. Now, even though this says MDOT and MDTA, our involvement will be focused on the tolling aspect, whereas MDOT's involvement will be on the project as a whole. And after that, the results, there's a reserve account that's established to address any work that's needed, and the section developer can only withdraw funds with the approval of MDOT and MDTA. Now, so then next is compensating events under number 35. And so, examples of compensating events would be if we breach the contract, if we violate laws, and much of this is standard language that you would expect for an agreement like this. I won't go through every item of these. Many of these are more focused on MDOT SHA. And that's, again, because we're doing the tolling piece, whereas they're managing the overall policy program. I'm sorry. So item 37, competing facilities. I wanted to highlight this for you just because the ICC is in the vicinity of this roadway. And when I say vicinity, I mean that really loosely. It's not on I-270 or, it connects to I-370, but the intercounty connector isn't considered a competing facility from this definition. And that was important to MDTA, just in case there are projects involving the ICC in the future. And then, let me see, financing. I'm jumping down to item 48, and that has to do with, and Member Arnger, I think, asked a question earlier about this, about liability. And so without prejudice to the phase developer's obligations under the P3 agreement, the section developer is responsible for financing the section at its cost and risk without recourse to MDOT, MDTA, or the state. So the repayment of any debt or equity arrangements by the section developers to finance the section will be the sole responsibility of the section developer. MDOT and MDTA will be required to provide disclosures if required and is customary for bond offerings. But I think that point is incredibly important, that it's non-recourse to the state, MDOT and MDTA. And then under number 55, we've talked about this before, that there'll be a separate trust agreement and MDTA will issue limited amounts of notes to the section developer. And that's a strategy just to reduce risk. There's certain expenses that the state is better equipped to manage, but the toll dollars generated from this program will repay those notes. And therefore, even though these notes are being issued, there's still no net cost to the state. And then item 56 allows for the refinancing of the notes on the 10th anniversary. And then 57 and 58 and 59 talks about tolling. And, overall, this term sheet, there's not a whole lot of tolling involved in the actual section agreement. And that's because that agreement references a toll service agreement, which is our next document talk about. And that's where the real meat of tolling will be found. Okay. And then 61 talks about MDOT default provisions. And then that concludes the section term sheet. Are there any questions before moving on to the toll service agreement term sheet?
Yes, looks like we have a question from Member Arnger.
Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down last time.
Oh,
I do not.
Member Rosen?
Just one quick question regarding the refinancing. I see that obviously we have to cooperate, and it notes that if there's a refinancing gain, that goes into the excess revenue calculation. What if there's a refinancing loss?
I think that, let me look at that section. I think that really applies to the section developer. If they finance the project, they could refinance the debt that they've incurred outside of the MDTA notes, because again, the notes from MDTA is small in relation to the cost of the overall project, but it's they're still critical, to take care of certain expenses.
So basically, there's no risk that and how this is structured, that upon some type of event of refi that we're on the hook for losses.
That's right.
Deb, before you start your next section, I don't know if anybody else is having the same issue. I've kind of lost my place a little bit ago, so I'm trying to figure out what page exactly you're on.
Okay, so in a second, when we start the toll service agreement, my book page is 284.
Okay. Doesn't look like I have any more questions from members of the board if you want to proceed.
So the toll service agreement, this agreement, the parties are just MDTA and the section developers. You notice some of these other agreements that we've talked about, it's MDOT, MDTA, as well as the section or phase developer, that's the party. So this is really our agreement between us and the section developers for the services that are provided and expectations. So And I think for this one, let me go through each one of these items in a little more detail, because again, this is really our agreement for the services that we provide and the developer. So the term is the term of the agreement. We're going to make similar representations and warranties. They're going to be responsible under data capture, which is number 6, for capturing the transactions and forming the trips and meeting the quality and determining the dynamic toll rate in accordance with the toll setting process that we publicly will go through, making sure that the transactions are matched to the right vehicle. This is that part of that quality requirement. And then, there's going to be some marketing requirement. So under 7.A, MDTA shall incur certain costs in the connection with certain improvements that it shall make in the existing toll system prior to the commencement with trips. So the section developer shall make a lump sum payment to MDTA during the D&C period in the amount to be agreed upon as part of the pre-development work. So I think let's talk about costs for a second. Is when MDTA provides these services, we pay, we have staff time, we have reconciliation time, we have money that we pay to toll integrators, we have upgrades to our system. And so what we're doing is we're capturing those costs into transaction costs. And we know what it costs us to process an Easy Pass transaction. We'll know a pay by plate. If we're mailing notices, mailing citations, giving customers the ability to go to district court and contest tolls. Each one of these activities, we have cost buckets for them, and we calculate per transaction costs. So the developer is going to be responsible for reimbursing us for those costs. Well, that works well when you're in the operation and maintenance phase. But in order for our system to be ready to accept these transactions, an example of that would be the sizing of our system. We're going to have to increase the size of our back office system, storage, potentially the call center. That's the cost that we're referring to in 7A, so that this is cost neutral to MDTA, and any enhancements above and beyond what our tolling system needs will be the cost of the developer. Okay. And then number 8, the developer is not allowed to make any toll system technology changes without our concurrent. So permitted vehicles, they have to allow the vehicles that are allowed on the roadway. Toll rates, the section developers shall be responsible for setting and calculating the toll rates applicable to each vehicle in the price managed lanes. This is in accordance with the toll rate setting process that we'll talk about in a minute. And we'll talk about how those tolls are calculated more in the next section as well.
Deb again, what section? Deb again, I'm sorry, what section are you on?
So that's number 11.
My binder is numbered completely different than yours, so I'm just trying to make sure I'm able to follow along.
So under the toll service agreement, there's a table that has different numbers. So toll rates was number 11 on that table.
You can go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. So number 12 is the toll system services, which talks about the type of responsibilities the section developer has. They have to capture the transaction. They have to classify the vehicle, whether it's 2-axle, 3-axle, etc. They have to form the trip. They have to have a host system. They have to be able to test the transactions. And then number 13 talks about the performance standards that we just talked about in Exhibit 6. They have to adhere to them. Item 14 requires them to maintain records and our ability to inspect and audit their records. Item 15 in this table requires confidentiality. And then item 16 talks about an interface control document. That's what's used to move the transactions from the developer system over into MDTA's back office system. So there's requirements there. We address under number 17 the modifications of the system and what's required. And it allows us to update our system. And when either system needs to be updated, we're going to provide notice 90 days in advance. Number 18 says that they have to comply with business rules that's set out in the documents. An example of a business rule is vehicle classifications. It is one business rule. Then we talk about the services performed by MDTA, and we're telling them that we're reserving the function of collecting the tolls and enforcing tolls. We're providing the customer service operations, the account management, which is largely associated with EasyPass accounts. We will be issuing transponders for those accounts, and we will be processing the trip that they formed. Number 20 says that we're allowed to appoint a third-party contractor. Today, that contractor will be TransCore for the back office piece. So this is just indicating that we don't necessarily perform these services on our own. We are required to also keep records that can be inspected and reconciled, because they'll be passing transactions over to us that they believe to be valid. There'll be a whole process to ensure that the KPIs are adhered to, and then finance will be processing payment to the developers. Well, so they have an idea of what's owed to them. Well, we're calculating what's owed to them as well, and we must be able to reconcile with each other. And part of that reconciliation is having the records to be able to share with each other. We're going to provide a transponder master list under number 22 to them, so that the customer understands when you have a valid transaction. Think about like our 3G system, when we're going to have the feedback transponders. This plays a role in that as well. It also requires that exempt vehicles be filtered out. And so basically any vehicle that is exempt, police is an example of an exempt vehicle. They need to be filtered out. We're also, for HOV and transit, we're requiring them to filter them out. Since that's free passage on the managed lanes, they're not even going to pass those transactions over to us. And then we get down to number 24. We talk about valid trips and what makes a valid trip. Number 25 is the resubmission of the trips. So system failures is under number 26. If either the section developer or MDTA receives notice of any system failure or degradation that may affect tolling operations, the relevant party shall report such notice promptly to the other party. And this is where it talks about buffering transactions. They have to have the capacity to buffer for 90 days. And the section developer must notify us prior to sending any backlog of transactions. In the event that MDTA or the designated CSC operator is unable to receive trips or process the collection of tolls for any reason, then MDTA may notify the section developer that it must withhold trips and not submit them to us until our outage is resolved. Following the resolution, MDTA may instruct the section developer to recommence sending those trips. So this section right here addresses Member Arninger's question a few minutes ago. And then number 27, which is also addressed in Appendix 4 in this document, this is where we discuss the ability to stop processing trips should there be concern over the quality of them. And then item 28 talks about the transaction fee. Earlier, it was the repayment of costs in order to have our system ready to accept these transactions. Now, 28 is talking about the fees when we're in O&M. And it'll include our ETC fees, personnel costs, as well as improvements that'll be made to our system. 29 talks about the termination of the fees, the calculations, the capital costs are continue. Then we get into termination under 35, change orders, and limited liability of MDTA. It is number 42. The section developer will have no claim against any assets of MDTA except to the extent of the notes that we issue. And the section developer will waive any rights to enforce judgment holding MDTA liable against any such assets of MDTA. So that's the table part. Then we have the Appendix 1 under the toll service agreement, which has defined terms. Then under Appendix 2 is rate setting. We talk about vehicle classifications. You'll notice these are the exact same classifications that we will have under 3G. When I say will have, I'm referring to the light and heavy classifications for 3 and 4 axle, tolling points, and requiring the signs, the toll rate, the base toll rate. These are examples of different vehicles, and then we give them examples of the classifications under Attachment B. We talk in Appendix 3, we talk about what's a valid trip, what's all the requirements in order for the developer to be paid. And when establishing these, MDTA and the P3 team had an eye on quality so that we were reducing any type of customer service issues and trying to minimize them. And then Appendix 4 is the right to stop accepting and processing transactions. And that outlines that. So these appendix go into some greater detail than the table up above that we just talked about. So that is the last of the documents to be incorporated into the P3 agreement. Can I answer any questions about the toll service agreement?
I don't have any questions. Any questions from members of the board? No.
Okay, so this is an update. Just like all the other items today regarding P3, this is an update item. And we just wanted to be able to start to put these documents in front of you. We recognize the volume of the documents. Like I said, if you went on the website, it's even a greater volume. So we tried to narrow them down to the really tolling specific or those that, MDTA's roles. And Member Von Paris asked about risks earlier to MDTA. That's what this item is intended to, is to highlight those items.
Thanks, Deb. Member Gaines, you have a question?
Yeah, Class 8, I guess, is motorcycles and it has a 0 multiplier. Does that mean we're not charging them?
You're on mute, Deb.
I'm at 5.5 on page 308. I thought I read that in one place, but I don't know if that's true.
So I think it does, you're right that under classifications, it does have a 0 multiplier. I would phrase that is part of the toll setting process. So the MDTA board.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, on the toll setting examples, it seemed like it was half. Maybe that's a typo. Maybe it should be 0.5.
Yes. You may be right, and I think that that'll be part of the toll setting process that we'll go through.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Doesn't look like we have any further questions from members of the board. I think we're moving into number 9.
Yes. Give
Okay,
me one second.
That'll be Deb, and then Carl Chamberlain will be joining you for this one as well, right?
That's correct. You see so we're moving on to
Is it
agenda.
possible that we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Why don't we do that? Let's take a, it's a lot of material. I know when my binder arrived, it was a big binder. So why don't we take a 5-minute break, and I tell you what, let's reconvene at 12:20.
Thank you, sir.
move forward.
Okay.
So whereas for the note, when MDTA refinances, we'll have the ability to control that rate and make the rate, you know, the same or lower. We'll have that ability. Okay.
The reason why I asked that was because in the documents it said there was a requirement to refinance.
Yes, we are, but we will have the ability to control that rate that's paid. And remember, the toll revenue goes back, is the one that's paying those notes. So if the rate was higher, then it reduces the amount of money to the developer from the net of the note piece. But because the notes are issued to the developer, it really makes the developer indifferent. So I guess with that, should member chairman, should I start agenda item 9?
Absolutely. Please proceed, Deb.
Okay. So the purpose of today's discussion is to provide the board with an update on staff's preliminary thinking for the toll rate range and soft rate cap for Phase 1 South, American Legion Bridge to I-370, and to discuss letters sent to potential developers regarding tolls and the toll setting process. It's important to understand this preliminary discussion and the future official toll proposal discussion, meetings, hearings, etc. in the coming months regarding the toll rate range and the soft rate cap is focused on the area of the American Legion Bridge I-270 to the I-370 corridor. Toll rates outside of this area would require a separate toll setting process. So MDTA is continuing its due diligence. Additional information above the information provided to you today will be provided when staff presents its official proposal to the board this spring to request approval to begin the public comment and hearing process. In your book, your materials are broken down into 5 sections. I'll turn the floor over to Carl, who will present sections 1 and 2.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Chairman and board members. So for the record, my name is Carl Chamberlain. I'm a project manager in the Division of Planning and Program Development. I will be the MDTA project manager responsible for conducting the public hearing process for setting the toll rates for this project. Perform the same role for the toll modernization public hearing process that took place in the fall of 2019. So for all board members that participated in those public hearings, this process will be familiar to you. So under tab 9, as Deb said, I'll be walking through the first 2 sections of the board book, explaining the information provided, but I'll not be reading the document word for word. However, we will be going through in order of the book, so I'll make it clear where the information is located as I go, so you can follow in the book if needed. There will be a few times where warranted and where important information is necessary to get precise that I will read directly from the board book. In those cases, I'll make it clear to you that I'm doing so. I'll do my best to answer questions you may have while I'm going through the material, but I may defer to other experts in the meeting to help answer those questions. So with that, I'm going to start on page 1 with the project introduction. One last note before I do get started. I will spend more time on some sections than others, and this section is a good example. So Will Pines, Jeff Folden, Deb Sharpless have covered a lot of the information that we provided in this introduction previously. So as such, I'm just going to hit the high points here, and then that way we can move on to some more project-specific information that we want to discuss in detail. Okay, so now beginning the introduction. A week ago today, as discussed, MDOT announced the selection of Accelerate Maryland Partners as the developer responsible for overseeing pre-development work, American Legion Bridge ALB, I-270 to I-70 relief plan. And the way this introduction was set up, it was designed to set the groundwork for a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about later. So a number of the items in this introduction have been discussed, and some of these items, for instance, are various elements of the plan, sort of the features of the progressive P3 model, other aspects of the developer proposal that benefit transportation in Maryland, and the next steps in the procurement process. So I'm not going to go through all that stuff again. That's in the introduction. So with that, I will move on to page 2 in the introduction and the next section, which is key elements of hot lanes. There's just a couple of bullets here, so I'll just run through these real quick. Again, just setting the stage for the material that's going to be coming up. So that first bullet, improving average evening commute times from the ALB up I-270 to I-370 by 50%. So from 32 minutes today to 15 minutes in the managed lanes and 23 minutes in the general purpose lanes. Increasing opportunities for transit service and ride sharing by allowing buses, high-capacity vehicles, and others free of charge. Keeping the general purpose lanes free for anyone to use with less congestion. And then lastly, reducing traffic on surrounding local networks by approximately 4%. Now I'm going to move on, still on page 2 here, to the cost of doing nothing. And simply, the cost of doing nothing here is overwhelming. What I'm going to do real quick is just reiterate what Chairman Slater discussed in his opening statement before we got into this information. So Maryland really has no funding options for replacing, improving ALB I-270 to 370 section of roadway. Maintenance alone on this section would cost billions of dollars. Without the private money involved in this plan, that money can't be used in other parts of the state for other state priorities. And we view this as a economic recovery through critical transportation investment. So Phase 1 South, and this is something I'm going to read directly from the board book. Phase 1 South will invest billions of dollars in private funding, critical infrastructure, help with Maryland recovery by creating thousands of jobs, thousands of local good-paying jobs, supporting freight movement throughout the National Capital Region, the Port of Baltimore, and BWI Airport. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next section. Again, still on page 2. We're going to go through statute and COMAR as it relates to this project. So first of all, MDTA has a responsibility under Maryland law to fix, revise, and set toll rates in accordance with Transportation Article Section 4-312, the Annotated Code of Maryland, and Code of Maryland Regulations, Title 11, Section 7, Chapter 5. So this is where in Maryland law you can find the procedures that we're going to be following. Knowing that, so what is MDTA doing now and where are we at? And again, all topics that I'm about to talk about are covered in more detail later in the book. We're just going to hit on them at a high level right now. So right now, we're conducting due diligence on the official staff proposal. Again, another thing we're going to describe later in the book. We're in the process of documenting and preparing the official staff proposal, which is going to be presented this spring to the board. And then once presented, it will be followed by public comment period and hearings for the public. And we'll eventually conclude with the presentation of a final toll recommendation to the MDTA board, which will be for approval later this year. And then one last note, Deb mentioned this in her introduction, but I will reiterate it. The proposal being considered only applies to Phase 1 South, and establishment of other rates that may be required for other portions of this program, Phase 1 North and others, will require a separate toll setting process. So with that, I'm through the items page 1 and 2. I'm going to move on to presentation purpose, which begins on page 3. This is actually one of those sections that I am going to spend a little bit more time on because the information in here is really important and again, really sets the stage for a lot of the information that we're going to be going through today. And there are a couple portions in this that I'll read directly from the board. So to start, the purpose of this presentation is to discuss preliminary information developed by MDTA staff on the toll rate range and soft rate cap prior to staff formally presenting a toll rate proposal to the board. It's clear to MDTA staff that the information that will need to be presented to the MDTA board and eventually to the public is more complex than traditional toll setting information presented in the past. To inform and prepare the MDTA board in advance of MDTA staff's proposal this spring, we're coming to you today with this information primer. In fiscal years 2012 and 2014, MDTA staff similarly provided the MDTA board detailed information during multiple meetings before initiating the official toll setting process. MDTA staff believes that the newness of dynamic tolling, coupled with the introduction of a soft rate cap, neither of which exists on any of MDTA's current facilities, warrants this level of discussion prior to the toll setting process. And the next piece here is 3 bullets on page 3 under what we say are important notes. These are 3 things I'm actually going to read directly from the board book as they are important to get exactly right. So just bear with me for a second. First bullet. This meeting is not officially part of the toll setting process, does not begin any official public comment period. Staff continues to analyze the preliminary toll rates in order to finalize the staff proposal for this spring. As stated, this meeting is intended as a primer on the information that is expected to be presented to the MDTA board this spring to allow the board to understand and digest the material. Now the second bullet. This meeting and the toll setting meetings are not part of the federal NEPA process. Third bullet. The public comment period for the toll setting process would only be started after the MDTA board votes to seek public input on the official staff proposal presented during the spring MDTA board. MDTA staff anticipates completing the entire toll setting process by the end of October 2021. And now that I'm through that, lastly, we always want to reiterate that MDTA is committed to transparency in meeting its statutory obligations while upholding the integrity of the separate and distinct NEPA and solicitation process. Okay, so that was a lot, but now that we've set the stage, we have just 2 more pieces of background information to go through before we get to the detail about the toll rate ranges. And I'm happy to stop here for just a second if there's any questions before we move on to talk about dynamic tolling. Excellent. So we're going to move on to page 4, section titled Dynamic Tolling. Now, the P3 team has come to the board on a couple of occasions and presented prior updates on the P3 program to the board with information about dynamic tolling and other topics. But we want to again set the stage prior to getting to the rate information. So I'm going to summarize information that's in this section briefly. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So let's start with the 2 types of tolling facilities that exist. First type is fixed price toll, and the second is variably priced toll facilities. Now, the board will be comfortable with the first type. Every facility, aside from the ICC and I-95 ETL and MDTA system, is a fixed price facility. Essentially, this is one price that applies at all times for the different categories of vehicles that use the facility. Under the second type, variable price, there's 2 categories. Time of day, variable pricing. Again, another thing our board will be comfortable with, as ICC and I-95 ETL facilities are both time of day price facilities. So that the price changes at 3 different times per day at set intervals. And then the second subtype of variable price facility is dynamic pricing, and that's what we're talking about here today. Now, we do not have a dynamically priced facility in our system today, and again, because of that, this is why we're bringing this information to you ahead of time to make sure you're comfortable with it before we move forward. So a quick definition on dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is a method of calculating the toll where the dynamic pricing mileage rate varies within the approved toll rate range in real time. Simply put, toll rate changes in real time within a pre-approved range. The dynamic facility uses operational metrics that are predetermined to adjust the toll in real time. Now, this may be new to us for our toll facilities, but it is a common practice in other businesses. This is something that you've likely seen in airline pricing, hotel pricing, things like that. Anytime where the demand for the facility is going to change over time, you see dynamic pricing in those types of business models. So now that we've gone through that brief overview of dynamic pricing, I want to go through the next section on page 4, which is setting toll rates on a dynamic facility. So we've just discussed how this is a different facility than our other facilities. And because it's different than our current facilities, it also requires a shift in mindset about how we think about setting tolls. Now, the primary focus of current facilities is on revenue to meet our fiscal responsibilities to own, operate, maintain, and finance those facilities. Rather than focus on revenue, however, the goal of a managed lane is to maintain free-flowing traffic in that facility. Now, to meet that goal, it uses pricing factors to influence traffic flow. As such, toll rates need to apply economic supply and demand principles to influence utilization of the managed lanes. And this is one of the reasons why setting toll rates for this facility is more complex than our other facilities. All right. Now that I've completed the overview of dynamic facilities, I'm going to go on to the last topic that I'm going to be discussing with you guys today, which is the toll setting process. And again, we're on page 4, and it starts with that last section, toll setting process. For those of you that remember the toll monetization public hearings from 2019, the information I'm about to tell you is familiar. And if you remember that process, then you'll remember me as well. And I look forward to going through this process with you one more time. So toll setting starts with a proposal by the MDTA staff to, and I quote here, adopt an increase in mileage rate ranges, pricing periods, toll zones, fees, or other charges on a variably priced toll transportation facilities project, end quote. So that's the high level piece of it, but now let's get into the details. So now I'm onto page 5, and we're going to start with the hearing announcement. So staff is going to present the staff recommended toll rate proposal at an MDTA board meeting later this spring. At that meeting, we will obtain approval from the MDTA board to initiate the toll setting process and proceed with holding public hearings. At the time of that staff proposal, the MDTA board is not voting on the information being presented. Rather, the MDTA board is agreeing to initiate the toll setting process and proceed with the public hearings. That's an important nuance of this part of the process. So now we're going to move on, still on page 5, to the next step of the process, which is the hearing process. So once we get approval from the board to proceed with these hearings, we will post the material at least 10 days before the first scheduled hearing. And in this case, what we'll be doing is, which is what we did on toll monetization, is posting that information the same day as the hearing, so it's available to the public. We'll provide an opportunity for public review and comment at one or more meetings held at a time and place of convenience to the public in each county where the change is proposed to be implemented. Now, those hearings require a quorum of members, plus the chairman or designee to attend. And then we will continue to accept comments at least 10 days past the end of the last hearing. And once we get to the end of that period, the public comment period can officially close. And we take all the information that we heard from the public, present a summary and analysis of those comments to the board members, and post that information to our website for the public to see as well. So that would conclude the hearing process of what we need to do. So next, I'm going to go on again, still on page 5, post-hearing process. And once we've gone through the hearing process, MDTA staff will present a recommended toll proposal to the board at a board meeting. We are then required to provide an additional opportunity to comment for the public. So the final recommendation, the time, place, and date of the MDTA board vote on the recommendation is posted to the MDTA website, and we accept comments for an additional 10 business days. This is a second comment period. After that second comment period, another summary and analysis of the comments is presented to the board and posted to the website. At this point, we're done with everything, and the board can officially vote on the recommendation. So that concludes the toll setting process. And as you'll see in your board book, we've also included a simplified flow chart in your book that summarizes the toll setting process. So you can always refer back to it and understand what your responsibility is as MDTA board as part of the process. And with that, that concludes the sections that I'm going to go over with you. And I'm going to hand it back to Deb Sharpless to go through the remaining sections of the book. But of course, happy to answer any questions before we move on.
Thank you, Carl. Before we hand it back over to Deb, I do want to take a pause and see if there are any questions from members of the board with the material that Carl went over in the process.
Chairman Slater, questions, please.
Absolutely. Member Carroll?
For my clarity, is the dynamic tolling process what happens on the Virginia side of 495? Is that how that process will work in Maryland as well?
It's exactly right. So Virginia has on their Beltway side a dynamic tolling process that is very close to ours. You'll see that our rate structure will be a little bit different in terms of where it is right now, but it's the same process and the same type of tolling.
Yeah, I would like to flag that for the board, for those of you who've not experienced that dynamic tolling process. Those rates, shall I say, are aggressive at times, and I assume that we will have the ability to make sure that we have some mechanism in place to not have that be the case on the Maryland side, or to mitigate that as much as possible.
We do. We built in some checks and balances. I just want to make sure you're talking about the Beltway and not I-66. I know I-66.
No.
Yeah.
That stretch of 495 from the split up through 66 if you're coming from the southbound side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Deb.
Okay. So next I'm moving on to section 3, which is the due diligence section. I'm sorry. So MDTA staff and its traffic and revenue consultants have been and continue to analyze toll rate ranges and a soft rate cap necessary to maintain 45 miles per hour at each toll segment within Phase 1 South. And really, I should phrase it as it's in order to maintain 50 miles an hour. I'm sorry, 45 miles an hour. I'm sorry to trip that up. In order to maintain 45 miles per hour at each toll segment. Part of MDTA staff due diligence included seeking input from the potential developers. MDTA is a tolling expert when it comes to its facilities. With this project being MDTA's first dynamically priced facility, as mentioned by Carl, as well as a first toll facility in this corridor, and it's outside of MDTA's existing facilities, staff felt its due diligence should include input from the potential developers who are experts in dynamic tolling, operating and financing managed lanes, and traffic conditions in this corridor. The input received is only one component of staff's overall analysis. This spring, when MDTA staff presents its official toll proposal to the board to begin the toll setting process, an explanation and discussion of the other due diligence performed by MDTA and its T&R consultants will be provided to the board. So now moving on to section 4. The first thing is mentioned by Carl. By statute, the board is required to set a minimum and a maximum toll rate range. What's not required by law, but what's permitted in COMAR is a soft rate cap. And remember, Carol, I think the soft rate cap is intended to address your statement about toll rates and when they can become higher. So let me start with minimum toll rate. So again, we have to do a range. And as stated by Chairman Slater in the beginning, it's not common to require a toll rate range. And so even though we set a maximum, if you think about those agencies that don't have a maximum, it means there is no maximum. So the minimum toll rate range, it's intended to cover our processing costs. Now the maximum toll rate on the range, it cannot be exceeded under any circumstances whatsoever. And it's only realized when the soft rate cap is exceeded and when you have the most extreme deterioration of traffic conditions and speed and gridlock. Another thing that's really important to understand about the toll rates, and we'll talk about this some more in how they're formed, is in the toll road, there'll be segments. There might be 10 segments, there might be 8 segments, but whatever the toll segment is, it's normally between 2 interchange points. The toll is determined for each individual segment. So if one segment has high traffic conditions and a higher toll rate and the next segment has lower, then that toll for the lower segment is the toll rate is lower for that. Now from a customer's perspective, they'll see the overhead toll rate sign that sums the toll rate for each of these segments. But I mention this because it would be a complete misunderstanding of how the toll rates are calculated, is to assume that a higher toll rate in one segment is going to automatically apply to other segments. So then moving on to the soft rate cap. The soft rate cap is not common in the toll industry. I'm only aware of it at some Texas toll agencies. And the intention is to constrain or compress downward the toll rate. The soft rate cap can only be exceeded when traffic volumes or speeds reach certain thresholds, and the toll rate has to be raised above the soft rate cap in order to maintain the 45 miles per hour. So, okay. Now, another piece of the toll rate range and the soft rate cap is this is a 50-year contract, and therefore there's escalations in these rates, is staff's thought at this time. And it's no different than, you know, the milk that you buy 10 years ago versus now, or any other cost. The managed lanes provide the supply of 2 lanes, but then customers' demand will change over time because we're going to have growing traffic, growing populations, growing incomes, and overall annual inflation growth as well. And so we have to be able to apply supply and demand economic factors to these toll rates, because we have a fixed supply of capacity, but we're going to have growth in the demand factors. And we'll talk about that more in the spring and dive into the escalation factors in greater detail. So next is the preliminary thinking of staff. And that's contained on a table on page 9. It's table 4. And we consolidated everything into a single table so you can have the entire picture. The first thing that you'll notice is the existing toll lanes. Under every scenario, every type of vehicle, they remain free, which speaks to the choice that Chairman Slater had mentioned. The next thing you notice is for the managed lanes, toll rates are established for each payment method, which is electronic toll collection or Easy Pass, unregistered video, which we call video tolls, and pay by plate. Next, you'll see the minimum toll rate, the soft rate cap, and the maximum. But before talking about that a little bit more, you'll also notice that transit and carpools of 3+ are free on the managed lanes. That's our current thinking. And then when we go back to the range, you see that there's a low end, a maximum, and the soft rate sits in between the two amounts. So now the discussion where we thought would be beneficial to say, well, what do these toll rates mean? What type of experiences are we anticipating? And we're comparing it to Virginia because that's our neighbor. And the first thing is when we look at Phase 1 South, American Legion Bridge, I-270 to I-370, the most common trip that customers will take is 6 miles, and it's between the GW Parkway and Maryland 187. Now, when you consider the whole facility, all of Phase 1 South, the average trip is 7 miles. And that's because some of these trips are outside the most common. The distance for the entire Phase 1 South is 12 miles. On weekdays, the average toll per trip that we expect is $5.02, and southbound $3.99 per trip. Now in Virginia, the average tolls on the managed I-495 and I-95 are $5.40 and $8.45 per trip respectively. On I-495, 85% of trips were less than $12, and 82% of those customers spend less than $20 a month, which speaks to the choice that managed lanes provide customers when it's right for their traveling demands at that time. And also in Virginia, the I-95 express lanes, 74% of customers spend less than $20 a month. So next on page 11 is average tolls. And on this table, we're breaking up tolls by average per mile, average paid, and then average lengths, and throughout the day. And so as you would expect, some of the heaviest congestion is northbound in the PM, and that's why the average toll is higher there compared to the AM time period. And then we have the average paid. Same thing. So when you think about the average trip that customers take, now we're applying the per mile rates, the average there, and that gives you the average toll paid. And we break it down by hours and then the overall daily. And then the average length. You can see that, the vast majority of times, in the morning, we're in the 6 mile range, and then we creep up into the 7s as we get later into the day. So then when we apply the average tolls, we try to dive down a little bit deeper as to what could some trips look like. One example could be a veteran that lives in the Falls Church area and is traveling to Walter Reed Medical Center. If he traveled at 3 p.m., the potential trip toll would be $6.52. He would save on average 21 minutes using the managed lanes, or if he chose to use the free general purpose lanes, he would save 10 minutes. And this also demonstrates, as Chairman Slater had indicated, that there's value to both the customers that choose to use the managed lanes, as well as those customers that choose to use the free general purpose lanes. Another example is the NIH researcher that might have to give a speech at a startup in McLean. She would save 14 minutes by using the managed lanes or 10 minutes by using the free general purpose lanes. So if traveling southbound on Maryland 187, and to the GW Parkway, 9 o'clock in the morning, the potential trip toll would be $5.59. A third example is a plumber that may be in the Tyson's Corner area that needs to respond to an emergency in the Shady Grove area. He would save 10 minutes on his trip by using the hot lanes at GW Parkway and traveling up to I-370. Now, if that trip happened at 1 p.m. In the afternoon, the potential toll would be $4.64. And the last example provided, again, trying to give a flavor as to what does this range, soft rates, average, what could it look like for individuals? And that's the example is a family of 4 living in Tysons that's going to Gaithersburg High School. Because this family meets the HOV 3+ requirement, their trip on the managed lanes would be free. And they would experience a savings of 10 minutes when traveling at 7 o'clock at night. So let me pause there for a second and see if there's any questions before moving to the next section.
Member Gaines?
Yes. How do we propose to verify that there are 3 or more people in the vehicle, in each vehicle?
The enforcement of HOV is the responsibility of the developer. And so there's different tolling technologies. I mean, Virginia uses something called a flex tag, where the family needs to designate themselves and they have enforcement measures. But there are other technologies, and that will be the responsibility of the developer. The developer is not to forward a toll with that meets the HOV criteria to MDTA.
So they'll want to collect the money if they can, so they'll be tough on it, I presume.
Yes, it's in their interest
Right.
to have enforcement. So with that,
Doesn't look
I'll
like
move
we
on
have.
to the.
Go ahead, Deb. We don't have any further questions, it looks like.
Okay, I'll move on to the next section, which is the letters to the potential developers. So as discussed in the due diligence section, section 3, MDTA requested input from potential developers. Communications with the potential developers regarding the toll rate range and soft rate cap was limited to 2 letters issued by MDTA. The letters were dated November 4th, 2020 and December 18th, 2020. And these letters are included in your materials. In November, the same letter was sent to 4 shortlisted potential developers. And in December, a revised letter was issued to 3 of the original shortlisted developers because one of the teams had dropped out. To minimize risks, the final toll proposal to be presented to the MDTA board in the spring needs to be sound and support the financial viability of the project while supporting the project goals such as trip viability, reduced congestion, and expansion of transit options. The potential developers were clearly informed that the information is subject to change. The information provided is subject to change before any final proposal is submitted to the board or the ultimate toll rate range is approved by the board after the public and transparent toll setting process is complete. And when I refer to the board here, of course, I mean the MDTA board. The feedback received confirmed the work of MDTA's independent traffic revenue consultants and MDTA that the preliminary toll rate ranges would provide congestion relief and reliable travel times. Your material summarizes the feedback we received as well as if we agreed or disagreed with the feedback. Examples of feedback we disagreed with included increasing the soft rate cap allowing the soft rate cap to be exceeded by certain percentages, adding additional growth indexes to the annual escalation, and creating additional vehicle classifications for heavy 2-axle vehicles. We disagreed with this input because it dilutes the effectiveness of the soft rate cap and it duplicates factors already considered or established. Examples of feedback we agreed with, including associating the toll rates to a toll segment instead of a gantry, and increasing the threshold for the soft rate cap to 1,600 passenger comparable equivalent vehicles per lane per hour, and changing the traffic volume and reducing the speed threshold as an or requirement instead of an and. Let me clarify what I mean by that. Is in order to exceed the soft rate, traffic volumes would have to be above the 1,600 and speeds below 45. So we made that an or requirement instead of an and requirement. And we did this because we felt like that would allow for the toll rates to more gradually adjust and provide more reliable travel times. And then the example about the toll segments, that had always been our intention, that it would apply to the toll segment. It just wasn't worded clearly enough so that the potential developers had that understanding. So your materials address all input that was received and whether or not we agreed or not. And you can see from your materials, it was only a handful of changes that we are currently thinking would be included in the toll rate proposal. So that, let me see if there's any questions regarding the input we requested from the developers. Okay. So
it doesn't look like we have any questions on that, but I think we'll probably have some questions after you conclude section 9. So
I believe member Gaines has just raised his hand.
I think it was up from the last time.
That's correct. I don't have a question.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes item 9, and this is an informational item. It's an update for you. Again, as we've said throughout, we're not requesting any formal action by the board members. We wanted to begin this conversation with the board members with this roadway being Maryland's first dynamically priced facility. And in order to have the transparency as we prepare to officially present a proposal to you in the spring to start the toll setting process. So right now we're in a pre-step 1 phase. Step 1 being when we actually present the proposal to you and start the process. We're in a pre-period right now. So with that, Carl or I'd be happy to address any questions you have regarding toll rates in this toll rate setting process.
Yep. I do have a few questions, and then I'll turn to members of the board. I think building on Member Carroll's comment, how do these rates and caps and maximum particularly compare to what we see on the Virginia system in terms of when you come across?
We believe they are comparable. The average toll rates for Virginia's managed lanes on I-495 and I-95 are $6.23 and $9.94 per trip respectively. Again, as stated, like 84% of trips on I-495 is less than $12 and 82% of customers spend less than $20. So, you know, they're comparable to the rates, but then what Maryland has, or is at least strongly considering at this point in staff's preliminary thinking, is that we will have the soft rate cap that helps constrain toll rates and can only be exceeded when traffic conditions warrant it, the most common, which would be northbound in the PM hours.
Yeah, in my mind, I think having a both caps is absolutely necessary in terms of having some checks and balances in there. But I think a lot of my other questions were answered. The other question I had is from an application kind of operational standpoint. You know, it's set by condition, but is it varying by the condition at the gantry or the section or a group of them together? You know, how did we lay that out?
That's right, it is. And that's really important for customers and the public to understand, as well as the board members, is when we have these different toll segments, generally in between interchanges, the toll rate is calculated dynamically for each individual segment. So the toll rate for one segment does not necessarily mean it'll be the toll rate for the other. So if you have a very high congested area, the customer may come on to the managed lanes, pay a higher toll during that congested segment, but if he chooses to continue into a lower congestion, the toll rate will adjust down for those other segments if the customer chooses to continue on the managed lanes. That
Right.
same customer might choose to go back onto the general purpose free lanes if that's the right choice for that.
Absolutely. That's really helpful, Deb. Before I turn to the members of the board, I just want to say thank you. I know it's a lot of work doing this in the process. And, you know, I think us coming out here really early like this and presenting this and giving people really, you know, months longer to really digest and understand kind of how these systems, frankly, it's not just the general public, but board members are kind of understanding and asking questions be really helpful. So any questions from members of the board? Looking like we have no further questions. I think that fulfills your obligations today, Deb. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And as we indicated, it's a team that supports Jim, Will, myself, and you know, we couldn't do it without the entire team.
Well, Deb is our resident expert, and I will tell you that she can't control the board schedule and agendas and when they come. So you may have been able to tell, but Deb is joining us from a family vacation and trying to kind of do her part, but she is absolutely the one that knows these topics the best. And I was really pleased that she was able to do it, but I hope she's able to get some time down now. So at that point, I'll turn it over to Executive Director Ports, who's been kind of quiet today for his report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had to put my phone on charge again because I started so early this morning. I ran out of battery already. But anyway, to the board members, recognizing that this meeting was extremely long, I'm going to keep it brief, but I'm proud to inform the board that once again, MDTA has been recognized by the Maryland Quality Initiative, MDQI, for their exceptional work at MDQI's annual awards ceremony, which was held on February 11th, 2021. The Bradshaw Road Bridge project won the Partnering Award and the Model Award for the over $5 million. And before MDOT used the term TBU, Transportation Business Unit, we were known as modals, and that's where the title of the award originated. So the JFK Maintenance Facility, HVAC, won the modal award for under $5 million. And we also got a planning study award for I-95 at Belvedere Road Interchange planning study. Although this is a planning award, members of the engineering group also participated in the planning effort. And of course, you know, that's headed up by Melissa. Also, I mentioned that we had our 50-year anniversary is this year. It's important time frame, but also the Intercounty Connector is 10 years old this month. You know, it's a 17-mile link between Montgomery County, Prince George's County. It was our very first all-electric toll variable price facility where we collected tolls at highway speeds. And just as a little bit of history, the ICC was included in transportation planning efforts tracing back to 1950s. That's how long it takes some of these projects to get completed. But it was Governor Ehrlich who made it a top priority of his administration. As a matter of fact, he said when he was going through the fields, he found a Nixon for president sign, that the initiative was so old. He used to joke about that all the time, and but he garnered bipartisan support between the federal government, local government, key endorsements, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Montgomery County, and one of Greg's favorite people, Melinda Peters, was the engineer on that project. She was a young, very young engineer at that time, and phenomenal engineer too. But final approval by the board, during a final approval by the board, Governor Larry Hogan dedicated the ICC to former Governor Ehrlich on September 7, 2017. And to give the board an idea how much the ICC utilized for FY 2020, toll transaction equated to 29.6 million constructed trips. And in FY 2020, toll revenue total $56.3 million. So that's it for me. And I'll turn it back over to Chairman Slater.
Thank you, Jim. It's great to see that recognition at MDQI. It's also great to see MDQI continuing over the years, and really a great partnering effort. And thank you for mentioning Melinda. I remember her working on the ICC. She and I started together at State Highway, and in many ways was one of the people you kind of feel like you grew up with coming up in this business. So it's good to see that project. I cannot believe that project is 10 years old now. It really flew by. But any questions for the executive director from members of the board? Well, great. With that, it's been a long meeting. So that concludes our agenda today. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion, Member Cox.
I'll second it.
Great. Thank you all for your efforts today, and thank you all for your patience as we're tackling some of these complex topics. And I'll see you soon. Or wait, we got to do a vote, don't we? I'm sorry.
Okay, vote, yeah. All in favor?
But any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now I'll have a good day.
You too.
Have a good one.
You too, Mr. Chairman.